Okay folks, we have quorum. Can I remind members that this meeting will be recorded and ask members to note that mobile phones should be switched off as they interfere with the recording. Tablet devices should be switched to mute, which is FN and F8. Can I remind members to declare their interests as appropriate throughout the meeting? Can I remind members to keep their questions short and concise with one question and appropriate supplementaries per member? We will go around again for further questions as time allows. And can I advise members that today's meeting will be at today's meeting we will be considering the amendments put forward by Rivers Agency in respect of the Reservoirs Bill, and it is important that members try to stay for the duration of that session and declare the meeting open to the public. Apologies, do we have any apologies? No apologies. Agenda item number 2 then, Chairperson's business. Can I advise members that National Ploughing Championships in the Republic will take place this year from the 23rd to 25th of September in County Laois. The committee office has been advised that most hotels are already booked for this event, so if any member is interested in attending, we need to know by next Tuesday what their intention is. In order to make the event of the NI exhibitors reception on the Tuesday evening, it would be necessary to leave Parliament buildings on the morning of the Tuesday 23rd of September. Can I advise members that once the hotel bookings have been made, it will not be refunded in the event of a cancellation by a member. The clerk is also considering a possibility of adding a visit to a rural development or farming development project onto the trip on the Wednesday morning. Can I have members' thoughts on that? If it would add value to the visit. You're travelling down that way anyway, so it would be. Any comments?
Well, Chair, I wonder, would there be a location close by too?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think I'd be in favour if there's
They have to be on
a
the
farm or a rural development project that's in close proximity to it. I'd be happy enough.
Okay.
Okay, members content then that they should communicate with
I'll send out
the clerk an email. Okay.
to remind people around here.
Okay, no problem. Okay, members, moving on then. Agenda item number 3, minutes of the meeting on the 15th of May. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of the meeting? Pages 6 to 11. Are members content that the draft minutes are accurate? If so, I will sign. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you, members. Thank you. Agenda item number 4 then is matters arising. Can I refer members to matters arising at pages 15 to 36? In respect of matters arising, can I advise members that the first 3 items may necessitate the requirement for extra meetings if members are agreeable. Now, alternatively, the 3 issues can be deferred to September. However, we need to be mindful that there are 2 major issues which have yet to be cleared by the Executive, namely the budget 2015-16 and CAP Pillar 1. These will have to be slotted into the forward work programme, and if necessary additional meetings may have to be arranged for them. There may be a slot on the 10th of June for one of these items, so can I ask members to carefully consider the request for briefings with the committee bearing this in mind. Can I also add to that we may need additional meetings with regards to the Reservoirs Bill, with regards to seeing and viewing the amendments from Rivers Agency on that. So I would ask you to proceed with caution here into what we can actually promise this side of recess. I'm not making light of any of these issues. In fact, they are very important issues, but we have a forward work programme, and whilst we wish to be agile as possible when it comes to issues, we do need to be able to work with the matters at hand, and CAP will be very, very important once it gets through the Executive, something we will all want to scrutinise and assess. Oliver, you want to come in?
You just quickly, Chair. Is any way are you suggesting moving these meetings to another day to fill in the programme? It wouldn't be able to do it all Tuesdays.
No, there's only really one. There's only one wee spare slot for one of these items if we see fit. You know, with the TVR, which has just made it through the executive, we have Farmers for Action and their push for legislation, which we've already told them that we are not competent on, and then we've got the issue on the. There was a second, third issue. The Portray letter issue, the SPRA, which is the competition with regards to dealing with the Portray letter. So there's three important issues, and we maybe have a slot for one of them this side of recess. Now we can either then decide, do we put on an extra meeting, an additional meeting for these other three issues, when we might need additional meetings anyway to cover the reservoirs bill, or if members see fit, we can maybe push these back to September and then get a briefing then, or have a meeting then when we come back. I'm totally in the hands of the members here on this. I can have as many meetings as you wish, but we do have to be careful with regards to workload.
Additional meetings would be Monday.
Yeah. Additional meetings will probably be Monday morning. Any other comments, members?
Yeah, we would need to talk, come back to you on that there.
Okay.
Interfere with the other committee meeting.
Okay, you want to bring it back next week then?
Yeah.
Discuss it, bring it back next week?
That's suitable.
Yeah, that's okay, yeah. Again, we have a number of options, additional meetings, or push it back to September. So it's okay. Okay, are members content then to action the remaining matters arising as suggested on the index sheet at pages 13 and 14? There's 2 pages. Okay, agreed. Any other comments? Okay, members, agenda item number 5 then is the oral briefing from DARD FSA on the alleged illegal slaughtering of cattle and meat cutting operation and suspected illegal movement of milk. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 41 to 43. An update from the Department on the illegal slaughter and meat cutting operations at pages 44 to 45, and an update from the Department on the illegal movement of milk at pages 46 to 48, and the Hansard from the meeting with DARD and FSA on the 11th of March 2014 on pages 49 to 59. Can I remind members that as there will be certain constraints placed on the information that can be shared with the committee due to ongoing criminal investigations, I would ask you just to be mindful of that, members, and be careful how you proceed. Can I welcome to the committee Michael Hatch, Senior Principal Veterinary Officer from DARD, Alan McCartney, Head of Agri-Food Inspection Branch DARD, Michael Jackson, Head of Local Authority Policy and Delivery and the Food Standards Agency. Gentlemen, you're very welcome as always to the committee on what is obviously a very serious issue. You'll have a briefing for us, a presentation at the start. If I can limit you to 10 minutes if that's appropriate, and then we can go straight into questions. Please assume that we have read the information you've already given us. Please. Michael, are you leading off?
Yes, I'm going to lead off, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us along to give you an update on these matters. You have previously been updated in relation to the illegal slaughter incident, and you have a brief update there of the current position. And as you say, Mr. Chairman, this matter is still under active investigation. This is the first instance that you've had an update in relation to the alleged illegal movement of milk. And again, just to highlight that this is also a live investigation. And hopefully, in the briefing that has been prepared in advance, we've been able to give you some background and context as to this investigation. We will, as you rightly say, be limited in what we can provide by way of further detail given the investigation that is ongoing. But really, if there's anything you think we can provide at this stage, I'd be happy to address that.
Okay. That's you. Anyone want to add anything to that? Okay. With regards to, and we'll go straight into questions. With regards to the ongoing investigation into the first instance with regards to the alleged illegal slaughtering of cattle, whilst I see your updates, it really is only the offences that they're being investigated under. Is there anything more you can add with regards to how widespread this problem or issue could well be? I know you're investigating a specific incident on a specific site, but can you then maybe put it in context for us as to how prevalent the criminal activity is and how widespread it would be?
I think there's two ways of looking at that. Firstly, in relation to the particular incident, I think at the time of our last update, it perhaps appeared that this was a rather large-scale activity. And just to reassure members that in terms of the activity that was found at the site in question on the 3rd of March, it wasn't a large-scale activity. At the time I indicated that our colleagues in Newry Mourne District Council were conducting further investigations, and as regards the possible distribution of meat from that particular source, the investigations did not indicate that meat had been placed on the market either locally in Northern Ireland or indeed in the south. There was extensive liaison with our counterparts, FSAI and DAFM in the south, and we were satisfied that this had not been a route for meat from this particular establishment. As regards the wider picture, clearly we depend upon intelligence being provided to be able to take forward investigations. At this point in time, we do not have intelligence to suggest that there is widespread activity of this nature in Northern Ireland. However, if further evidence comes to light suggesting that there may be places or people involved, we most certainly plan investigations working closely with DARD and with our colleagues in PSNI.
Thank you for your answer. I know you're constrained, you have to be careful what you say, so I do appreciate that. With regards to the joint governance or the joint investigation that will presumably be led because of the proximity to the border, and we had written to the Oireachtas Committee and they noted the situation but did nothing further to add, basically. So again, it was very, very close-lipped. How do you see that ongoing investigation going, or indeed the relationship, in order that other activity can be detected if and when it appears? Are you confident that the two jurisdictions and the multiple bodies within the jurisdictions, whether it be the FSA, the PSNI or Environmental Health and Councils, are working well together, both in a multi-agency approach and in cross-border approach?
If we can deal with the cross-border, first of all, we have always had very close working relationships with our colleagues in the south when it comes to dealing with any food incident, be it a routine matter of a product that hasn't been made correctly or needs to be withdrawn from the market. And we have no difficulty in that regard in being able to work together to make sure that consumers across the island are protected. Since we last came to speak to the committee, I'd mentioned that we were looking to work even more effectively across the various agencies. And the FSA has been in discussions with PSNI at a fairly high level, and we're going to be entering into further agreements to formally share information and data. So this will bring all of those involved in regulatory stroke criminal activity much closer together and much more able to share information in a timely and effective manner. So I'd like to reassure the committee that that is most definitely a strengthening of the system. And then finally, just to mention that within the next few weeks, we expect the final report by Professor Elliott into the integrity of the food chain to be published. and clearly there will be recommendations there that will apply across the United Kingdom, and we'll be looking at that as a matter of priority to see how we can take forward those recommendations.
Are you, last question before I put out to members, are you, Michael, confident that the people on the ground, your officers in FSA and the PSNI officers that are dealing with this on the ground, the ordinary constable who comes across something, are you confident that there is the expertise there and the awareness to know who actually should be dealing with it immediately, and that is then passed on mechanically?
In terms of who has responsibility for what, I don't think there's any greyness around that. Each of the organisations is clear where their responsibilities lie. But one thing that we are looking to do is to raise the profile of those issues, which would indicate that potentially there is something going on in relation to food which shouldn't be happening. So we will be looking to raise the profile of those issues, and indeed that's something which PSNI are very keen to work with us on. So at the moment it would be wrong for me to say yes. For example, whenever a police-led investigation is being carried out, an alarm bell would ring in relation to things that would ring for the likes of DARD and FSA, but that's something which we are going to be taking forward forthwith. And I say PSNI are very keen to help on that front and be alive to the kind of thing which could be a matter of concern, that we'd be able to pick it up at a very early stage and then get an investigation organised.
Okay. Can I ask just the DARD officials then, are you confident and happy too also with the level of expertise at the cutting edge, at the source of the investigation basically?
I think maybe if I just sort of lead off from our perspective in terms of the work they've been doing with Food Standards Agency and the police with regard to the suspected illegal movement of milk. I think everyone is very clear about their role and their remit within the investigation as a whole, and there has been very good cooperation through the multi-agency approach that we've put in place and through the regular liaison that we've had over recent months. Obviously, you know, there are always issues which will be taken into consideration around making sure that we're putting the right staff on the front line at the right time and with the right people. And there'll be ongoing considerations just in the weeks and months that lie ahead, and we'll be interested to see what comes out of Chris Elliott's report on the integrity of the food chain, and we'll take cognizance of that.
Okay. William Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We find it learning just a milk producer myself. So, in regard to the legal movement of milk from the Republic into Northern Ireland, have you any evidence to suggest this was widespread?
Again, as Michael has indicated in some of the answers in relation to illegal slaughtering, the work that we're doing is very much based on information and intelligence that we receive. So at this point in time, the information that we have would suggest that it's only a small number who are involved. And I think it's an important point you've made. The vast majority of our food business operators in Northern Ireland comply and often exceed the legal requirements, and that's vitally important to remember and bear in mind.
Yeah.
If I could just add to that in terms of making sure that industry is doing everything it can. We have recently held a meeting with the dairy industry to reinforce the importance of them fulfilling their obligations, and we're asking them to enhance the level of control and check that they have from the milk at the point where it is collected, as opposed to at the factory door where most of the microbiological and chemical checks start. We want them to be making further checks themselves as regards to traceability, because fundamentally it's their job to do that.
Given that they bring down a new quota a year, I would surmise that this sort of activity would be less attractive to those that would be probably doing it. Am I right saying that?
There is possibility that behaviour could be linked to quota issues. That said, the likelihood of it happening could reappear quite quickly again after the summer. Now, we are in no way being complacent in considering that we have identified all instances of this, and we will be maintaining vigilance throughout the year, not waiting until towards the end of the year, whenever it would be clearly much more likely to happen. But we're working on the assumption that if a market has been established to move the milk, the primary driver is likely to be quota. But there could be other motivations, and we can't make assumptions that it will only happen whenever producers in the south are getting close to their quota.
And one finally, I'm not right in saying that there's a big onus on the processors. They have within their power to deal with this themselves, have they not?
Every food business operator has an obligation to ensure that the food that they produce complies with food safety requirements, is safe for human consumption, and that they can demonstrate the traceability. So it is very much the case that purchasers of milk must satisfy themselves as to the provenance of that milk, and that's an area we've asked them to re-examine.
Okay.
Tom, you can.
Thank you, Chair. On the slaughter of animals, you've reassured the committee that it wasn't a large-scale operation, it was a small-scale activity. How many animals were involved then in that activity?
Sorry, when you say animals involved,
Yeah, were slaughtered.
well, it's only possible to consider that in terms of what is found at the time of the investigation. So at the time this particular multi-agency inspection took place on the 3rd of March, there was very little evidence of slaughter at that point in time. There were not a large number of carcasses on site. There were obviously animals on site because of it being a herd. Michael could maybe comment more towards the number of animals that would have been in that location. But there wasn't evidence of a large number of animals having been slaughtered and carcass meat being present.
And during your investigations, did you find out anywhere, you again reassured the committee that this didn't go into the food chain. Well, did you find out where then it went or what it was used for?
The investigation centred around the meat that was on site at that point in time and the known intelligence around that. So that's as far as an investigation can go. We always have to be governed by the information that's available at the point in time and the evidence that can be gathered. And the key thing at that point in time is to identify if there has been meat that has gone into the market which shouldn't have gone in, and to take appropriate action. And as I say, in this case, there wasn't evidence that at the time this inspection took place that meat had been being placed on the market, and therefore no action was necessary to protect consumers.
Yeah, but then did your investigations find out what this was done? Obviously this was done for a purpose. It wasn't just that cattle were being brought in and been slaughtered. There was some purpose behind it. The meat was going somewhere. Did your investigation find out where this meat was actually going to, what source it was going to? You know, it could go to many different sources, even if it wasn't going into the food chain. Did you find out where this actually went?
In terms of what the activity that was taking place at that point in time, there was no evidence gathered by any of the authorities that are involved to determine where meat may have gone from that site. Now, obviously, within an investigation, we follow particular lines of inquiry, which was the case as normal here. But we also have vigilance throughout the day-to-day routine controls which are being carried out by the environmental health officers of district councils, looking for any anomalies or anything which doesn't stack up. And we do not have intelligence or evidence to conclude that the meat from this particular source was being distributed for further sale within Northern Ireland or in the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, okay, we'll leave it at that, Chair.
Okay. Alderman McMullen.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Do we know where any of the cattle came from? Michael?
Well, in terms of the carcasses that were found, I really can't go into the detail. That does form part of the investigation. It's one of the lines of inquiry. You know, my role, or veterinary service role, is really regarding the cattle, the live cattle, And as part of the investigation, we conducted several cattle identification inspections of herds that we believed may have been associated or linked to the offences. And in the course of that, we did discover some irregularities, and they are forming part of the investigation now. There was also a number of samples taken during the case. I don't think that's any secret, and those also form part of the investigation. We did, laboratory analysis. We are at this moment in time, the investigation is not concluded. It's still very, very live, and hopefully within the next probably couple of months, we'll be in a position to close this case. Certainly from our side of things, but we're not there yet. We have the Veterinary Service appointed an experienced criminal investigator with a background of veterinary public health and meat hygiene, who knows the industry well and also has investigative training. And it's been overseen by my colleague in enforcement, Danny Gray. So I mean, we've devoted resource and prioritised this case, but I can't really go into any further detail about it because that's where we are. I have to respect the course of justice.
Fine. When we can't go into the actual cattle, but there is a section of cattle nomadic. Are we looking at that section? But the term nomadic cattle is this.
In terms of the source of these, well, I mean, all avenues will be explored. I'm not sure that the nomadic cattle, I think that refers to imported cattle. Mm-hmm. I don't know the details of that, and I couldn't disclose them anyway.
Right. And when you said on the day of that investigation, you were satisfied that the meat that day didn't go into the public domain, which is good news. But if we look into it, there has to be obviously more cattle slaughtered prior to your investigation. Is your belief that could have went into the public domain?
In terms of activities that may have happened associated with this particular site, the investigation always has to be led by the information and evidence that's available, and that determines how you take it forward. It's not always the case that whenever you receive intelligence alleging that a particular activity is happening, that you get a full picture as to what else may be happening, further down the line. So it's a question of liaising with the appropriate authorities and making as much inquiry as you can. It would be impossible to say exactly what had happened prior to the investigation on the day in question. But all relative information and evidence gathered on that day was pursued.
Okay. My last question, Chair. In the report it does mention a single individual. Was it a single individual operation? Because that sort of operation would be very big for one man.
In my report, I was referring to the investigation, really, of the live animal aspect. The cattle identification issues, animal byproduct issues, and I was really just clarifying that there's one individual still under investigation.
Well, do you think the meat side of it was a big operation?
In terms of the particular site where these investigations took place, no, there isn't evidence to suggest that this was a major activity.
Was it part of a major activity?
I couldn't possibly comment without the potential for interfering with other investigations that are currently ongoing.
Okay, Ian Milne.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from Oliver's questions, you say that you deal with the live animal issue, right? Well, can you tell us then, that if these live animals that you've saw on this farm or whoever has, right, if they were reported stolen or whether they were connected with a particular farmer, or are you saying stolen animals are involved, or is a collaboration there, with individuals and the slaughter that was taking place? Can you tell us that?
I'd be loath to get into any details of the source of issues. It's all I would say is that irregularities were found. We've taken decisive action with a small number of cattle whose identity could not be ascertained at all. Those cattle were removed and have been destroyed. We also have conducted, as a routine cattle identification inspection as part of the single form payment cross compliance inspection. So those follow a certain course, and where irregularities are found, penalties are applied. In terms of, for example, the animals whose identity could not be ascertained, well, it is open to speculation where those animals are from, but it's still an ongoing investigation. It may be that that information will come to light, but we're too early on in this stage, and identities can be unknown for a number of reasons, and being stolen is just one of several.
I understand about the live investigations, but and the last time you were here and this time also, it's one of those things that you can't really ask questions because everything can be referred back to you. So we're trying to probe what we can.
I understand.
It's very difficult to do that. But what I'm asking there, and then, do you believe then that this is, you say it's a small operation? Do you believe then that this is just a one-off, or is it just the tip of the iceberg, or is it something that you've stumbled across, but there's actually, there's cattle and sheep and etc. there have been stolen for this particular reason, for slaughter, or feed into the food chains? I'm asking, do you believe?
I think in terms of the extent of the problem with illegal slaughter, we don't have evidence that that is a major problem in Northern Ireland. And as I said at the outset, we are improving intelligence gathering, intelligence sharing. That means we will be able to react much more quickly and plan detailed investigations as and when we get this intelligence. But it wouldn't be the case that we have major concerns about this being illegal activity on a large scale. That's not to say that intelligence could not come to light very quickly that we would have to react to, but it's not something that we believe is being conducted in Northern Ireland on a large scale.
Okay. Thanks very much, and thanks for the presentation.
Okay, Robin Swan.
Thanks very much, Chair. The milk movements across the border sort of really hit the press about the 28th of March. You were already having a meeting with the industry sort of back in November, middle of November last year. Were you aware of a situation that was going to occur, or had there been concerns raised at that stage?
I think what we can say is that we were alert to the potential for an issue, and we had received some information at that stage, and police made an arrest at the end of October, and we seized and condemned a quantity of milk on a vehicle associated with that. So we were alert to the issue, and we had been working with the police, with the FSA and with the Rural Payments Agency, and with colleagues in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. As Michael has already alluded to, we met with the industry in November and earlier this month as well. We have issued trader notices to the industry, and we have been in contact with all dairy farmers as part of a pre-planned campaign that we had in place, a Keep It Out campaign, where we were able to sort of add in the importance of not adding milk other from your own production into your bulk tank. So we were aware, and we have been able to use the information that we have received, carefully analyse it and turn it into intelligence that has allowed us to take forward the actions that we've taken.
is the industry coming forward with any solutions or any way they see that can?
Well, certainly, one of the things that we have been doing with the industry is re-emphasising the important role that they have to play. All food business operators, be they milk purchasers, be they dairy farmers, have a responsibility in law to discharge their food safety requirements. And certainly milk purchasers have taken this issue very seriously. They have all been in contact with their milk producers. They have been reminding their milk producers not to get involved in these practices. And there are simple steps that we have discussed with milk purchasers as well that can be taken in terms of analysing production figures, looking for anything untoward, following that up appropriately, sharing any information that they receive with the FSA, with ourselves, with the Rural Payments Agency, and also in terms of general vigilance by their tanker drivers on collection as well. So I think, to be fair, the industry has taken a responsible approach to this, and we're grateful for that.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Can I just add, follow on from Robin's questions? We can all see the potential for this crime, with regards to the quota system and basically what is the non-quota system up here. What's the actual practicalities of that? Whilst we know that all milk has to be pasteurised and everything else and go through the rigours, the actual movement of milk can't be easy. And of course, the larger the quantity, the harder I'm sure it is to move. You're not moving this in gallon jars. What sort of containment is used when the produce is moved from south of the border north? Are we talking about plastic containers? Are we even talking maybe even slurry tanks? What is it that's moving? What vehicles are being used to move this produce south north?
Okay, well, I don't want to stray into too much detail in terms of the ongoing investigation, but members will no doubt be aware from coverage in the press that it tends to be transported in 1,000 litre intermediate bulk containers, which are large plastic containers in a metal cage, generally on the backs of lorries.
And of course, whilst there's money to be made, there's going to be crime. What enticements is there for farming community with regards to this? What would the commercial value be of illegal milk? And also on that, and I know that you talk about the milk purchasers and how worried and concerned they are about this, and then how they wish to self-regulate. How easy is it for those milk purchasers, and how easy is it for you as agencies to have eyes on the milk purchasers to evaluate any spikes in production? Because certainly this will have to come from somewhere, and it would have to have commenced at some point. So there's bound to be records that show spikes of production upwards. Is it as blunt as that? Or is it much more tactile with regards to how the people operate?
Well, I suppose maybe if I can try and deal with that for you, I suppose in terms of motive, the motive probably is money, and on two fronts. Some farmers in the Republic of Ireland, with a view to potentially avoiding super levy due to the quota situation, may consider various options. Now, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine in the Republic of Ireland and the Minister of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine has been very firm that farmers need to manage their production in the south of Ireland, taking cognizance of the quota situation, and reminding farmers that it's an offence to sell milk other than to a registered purchaser. So on the one hand, there's potential motivation there in terms of avoiding a super levy, and obviously a farmer who would take receipt of milk here may well be taking it at a reduced price and then turning it for whatever his milk purchaser is paying. So the motivation is money. Just dealing with the second part of your question, you are correct that analysing production records is an important part of this. That is something which is done routinely as part of the official controls that we discharge on behalf of the Food Standards Agency in any event, both at farm level and also with milk purchaser inspections which take place on a routine basis.
Okay. Tom Buchanan, you want back in again?
Yeah, following on from all the questions on the animal slaughter, all the carcasses found in sight whenever the investigation commenced, were the ear tags retrieved for those animals?
In terms of what was found on site, given that the department is still conducting an investigation, it would be inappropriate to comment around any of the specific detail as to what was happening with the animals at the time the raid was conducted.
Okay. Well, will this investigation actually find out what this operation was set up for?
That will only be known at the conclusion of the investigation when all lines of inquiry have been pursued and all evidence has been examined. I think it is important to flag that when any of the agencies involved in protecting consumers in the world of food safety become aware of a problem, the key thing is that we do organise and conduct thorough investigations as quickly as possible. And in particular, where we discover that food which is not safe has been placed on the market, that we take steps to make sure that is withdrawn and consumers are not exposed to risk. Depending on what is found in any given investigation, you will not always find exactly what was happening to the absolute final degree. You will be limited by what you can glean from the investigation at that point in time. I would like to provide reassurance, because I think there was maybe some concern amongst members at the last occasion we were here. The FSA and DARD, and working with PSNI, we are proactively trying to identify any individual who is trying to work outside the law in relation to the world of food safety, because that is unacceptable both to consumers and it's unacceptable to Northern Ireland because of the jeopardy that could bring to our economy. All intelligence will be treated appropriately, sensitively, and investigations will be taken forward in a timely manner to ensure that any potential wrongdoing is identified and that ultimately those who are working in this way are removed from the system to overall protect the integrity of our food chain in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay. Ian Milne, again?
Just on the milk. The milk that was uncovered, was there tests done on it? You know, was there any contamination found? Because we're talking about the type of container, you're talking about them 1,000 litre containers there. You know, where they, they're usually used for detergents and stuff of that nature. You know, so did you do an examination on the milk that was found? And the reason why I asked is, if you didn't, well, you know, that's what you found. You know, what about the stuff that you haven't? Should that not have been done if it wasn't? Thank you.
Certainly in terms of the milk that was found, it was seized and it was destroyed. We didn't conduct any tests on it on the basis that its traceability couldn't be verified, and that it was transported in containers that were not marked for food use, and those containers were not refrigerated in any way to maintain the temperature of the milk. So there were very strong grounds for destroying the milk, and we had no difficulty in securing condemnation notices on that basis.
So that confirms the point that I'm trying to make. You know, so therefore, you know, if you haven't done tests on it, there you have to assume that there has been milk of that same nature gone into the milk that we drink on a daily basis. So therefore, you know, surely there has to be some alert, or something has to be done, you know, to prevent that from ever. It has to be taken very, very seriously for a start, and therefore, you know, farmers, these people that are potential people that may do this, you know, needs to be informed of the dangers of producing milk and putting it in that may be contaminated.
You're absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons why we moved very quickly to meet with the industry in November last year, in order to reinforce these messages. And as I've said, the industry have taken a responsible approach. In November, almost immediately after the briefing that we provided, the Ulster Farmers Union and Dairy UK issued a joint press statement, which was very strongly worded, aimed both sort of at milk purchasers and milk producers. We have continued to work with milk purchasers through trader notices, through a recent stakeholder meeting, and we have engaged with all dairy farmers right across Northern Ireland through issue of a letter as part of our Keep It Out campaign. So dairy farmers are in no doubt about the importance of this, and at the Winter Fair, this was the main theme of the exhibit that we had on. Obviously, we were looking at a range of issues around keeping things out of milk supply, but it provided an opportunity to reinforce messages around not getting involved, taking receipt of milk and putting it into your bulk tank when it doesn't originate from your own herd.
Just to say there that maybe if something like this reoccurred again, it might be beneficial for the department to do tests on it, you know, to be fit to relay to the public, at least to leave it and, you know, to eliminate any fears that people might have of you know, contaminated milk there entering the mainstream, because it can be very damaging to the industry, you know, all of this.
I think it's important to remember that the milk, once it goes from farm, if it had been, irrespective of the source, whether it's from illegal importation of milk or genuine milk produced on the farm, whenever milk is taken to a processing establishment, it's subject to a very wide range of tests and checks. So if, for example, you had a situation where milk was transported in a container that had been used for another chemical or something, even though milk is bulked up by the time that we get to the processing establishment, the routine checks there would determine if there was a problem with contamination, and at that stage it wouldn't actually enter the food chain. So we do have that sort of built-in braces where, irrespective of where the milk starts its journey, when it gets to the processing establishment, there's a very wide range of microbiological and chemical tests take place.
I'm glad to hear that's reassuring. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Alderman McMullen, again again.
Just very quickly, how confident are you in going to court, taking somebody's going to be amenable to this?
At the end of the day, in both of these matters, when investigations are concluded, files will be prepared and submitted to the PPS, and they will make the decision as to whether or not the grounds and criteria for prosecution are fulfilled. Certainly, from the perspective of the Food Standards Agency, whenever there is evidence that anyone has been undertaking illegal activities, has been putting food onto the market which doesn't meet food safety requirements, hasn't been handled properly, we will certainly have no difficulty in supporting formal action against such individuals.
In this case, how confident are you at the minute?
I can't speak on that point because ultimately the case files have to be prepared and sent to PPS. I just can't give any assurance around that. But suffice to say, these are significant investigations.
And when do you say we should have some idea on this here? Soon?
Again, it's not possible to put a time on it because there is due process that has to be followed. And once the key thing is to get the investigations concluded and prepare the files and submit those to PPS, and then they will be considered. I mean, I think I understand the frustration that sometimes these things appear to be sort of long and drawn out, but they are very complex matters to investigate. And You know, in terms of, if you look at the instance of the illegal movement of milk, there's an awful lot of investigatory work that went on in the background, a lot of planning, organisation. Each stage of an investigation of this nature takes time. The key thing is that we do it as quickly as we can, and then we move through the system.
Are you happy with the number of people you have on the case? Or would you have liked to see more?
In terms of any investigation around food-related matters, we look at the extent of the evidence that we have. We make sure that investigations are appropriately resourced, and we pull additional resource as and when we need it. So we make sure that at the point in time where we go out into the field to conduct an investigation, that we're satisfied that appropriate resources and support is available to take it forward.
Could I just add, from the Department of Agriculture point of view, I mean, we have a relatively small enforcement team, but they are very experienced. And as I alluded to earlier, we have devoted resource to this. And I can assure the committee that it will be a thorough and detailed investigation. And whenever that is concluded, if there is sufficient evidence, a file will be submitted to the Public Prosecution Service. But at this stage, we're not in a position to confirm that, because it's still ongoing. But I can assure you that we are working hard on this file.
Okay. Okay, no further questions. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time here and your presentation and your answers to our questions. Again, very, very serious issue, and we wish you all the best in your investigations.
Thank you.
In future. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, moving on then, agenda item number 6, the oral briefing from the PSNI, Agricultural and Rural Crime. Can I refer members to pages 61 to 68, which provides the PSNI quarterly update on agriculture and rural crime to the 31st of March 2014. A report on agricultural crime at pages 69 to 86, and previous correspondence from the PSNI at pages 87 to 101. Can I welcome to the committee ACC George Hammond,
Thank you, Chair.
Superintendent Brian Key, Sergeant Gary McMullen, Jeff McNamara, Operations Manager. Gentlemen, you're all very welcome to the committee. It's good to have you here to speak and discuss this very serious issue, which is agriculture and rural crime. Brian, it's very, very good to see you again. I know you from your time in Ballymena, so welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. So, I suppose, can I ask members to keep their questions concise and to the point, and following the briefing then we will go straight into questions. George, I know you're leading off, if that's okay. If I can ask you to keep to 10 minutes, if you can, and then please assume that we've read the material that you've given to us, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, well, thank you
very much.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee to report on agricultural and rural crime. As you're perhaps aware, I'm Assistant Chief Constable George Hamilton, and Superintendent Brian Key, and Gary McMullen and Jeff McNamara are also accompanying me here today. Brian actually leads he's the service lead for rural and wildlife crime. As a police service, we're very aware of the significant contribution that the rural community make to a successful Northern Ireland. And the agri-food sector, we recognise, as I'm sure you're only too well aware, is one of the biggest and most successful sectors of the local economy, with over 49,000 farms in Northern Ireland supporting in the region of 24,000 jobs. So we take this seriously as a police service, and I know you as a committee do, and that's why we are here today. The sector contributes some 4.4 billion to the Northern Ireland economy, and with the intention, the aspiration that this will grow to 7 billion by 2020. So, as such, I'm pleased to report that crime against the farming community is relatively rare. That's not to say it doesn't have a big impact on those who are victims of the crime. But burglary, robbery and theft against farms and farmers accounts for 2.3 of all such offences, and it's 8% of all crime across Northern Ireland. So that's just trying to put it into perspective and into a strategic context. In the financial year just ended, 2013-14, there were 870 agricultural crimes. Probably pick this up from the documentation that we have supplied. That is a slight increase of 5 offences on the previous financial year, but it does follow 2 years of decreases. We had a 5.76% decrease in 11-12 and a 2% decrease in 12-13. But of course, statistics are only a small part of the story, really. We recognise that, and we take it seriously. We don't hide behind those relatively small statistics. We understand the impact that crime against the farming community has on farmers, on their families, farm workers and the businesses in the wider rural community. It's for this reason that we do indeed take it seriously. I chair a gold group internally within the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and Brian has been appointed as the service lead to give this momentum so that our attention, our focus remains on rural crime. Every rural community in Northern Ireland has a dedicated neighbourhood policing team with an inspector, a sergeant and a number of constables who are allocated to this function. In a joint initiative between the Department of Justice Community Safety Unit, the National Farmers Union Mutual Insurance and ourselves, a data analyst has been dedicated to rural crime since September of last year. Her role is to analyse rural crimes and identify emerging crime patterns and series. And in fact, some of the documentation that you've had in preparation for this committee has been prepared by that analyst. This information is then supplied to local police commanders, because this is a local problem, to put in place the appropriate operational tactics and plans to prevent and detect rural crime. So the data analyst has been very helpful in producing problem profiles in relation to agricultural crime, livestock theft, farm machinery theft, and subject profiles on who the suspects may or may not be. And that work is all to support the front end of detecting and preventing crime at district level. So, without boring you with the detail, we do have a control strategy. It's based around the principles of prevention, of information gathering, of enforcement and of reassurance. And rather than me telling you the good work that Brian does day in, day out, I'm going to get him to explain those 4 pillars briefly in the 6 minutes we've got left, Brian.
Okay, sir. Thank you. And Chair, ladies and gentlemen, a significant amount of work is undertaken under each of these 4 key pillars, but to give you a flavour of some of that work under the heading prevention, our crime prevention officers, neighbourhood policing team officers regularly engage with the rural community at rural events, as evidenced recently at the Balmoral Show, other recent events in Shane's Castle Antrim and in Carnlough, Ballycarry and the Island McGee areas of Larne. Further rural crime prevention events will be held throughout the summer, such as the Rural Safety Event organised by Downpatrick MPT and Downpatrick Police and Community Safety Partnership, to be held at Down Racecourse this coming Friday. On Saturday, we will also have a presence at Ballymena Show, and on the 14th of June at Gosford Park in Armagh, and at Oma Show on the 4th and 5th of July. These events provide opportunity not only for police to engage with the rural community, but also to discuss farm security, how it can be improved through products such as CCTV, tracker, Caesar data tagging, and indeed closed shackle locks. Under the heading Information, through these organised rural crime prevention events and informal day-to-day contact with farmers whilst on patrol, police officers are continually encouraging farmers and the rural community to report suspicious vehicles and suspicious behaviour. Farmers know the rural community better than anyone and know what is normal and what is unusual or suspicious. Live-time reporting of unusual or suspicious activity significantly enhances our opportunity to prevent and detect rural criminality. Under the heading Enforcement, the analysis of rural crime enables us to identify hotspots and target our high-visibility patrolling into those areas. All officers have a 24/7 contact number for the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development to confirm the bona fide of any livestock being moved at night. Agri-crime related searches have been conducted, for example, in the Armagh area in January. A mini excavator, a slurry tanker, stolen number plates and cash were recovered and 2 people arrested. An additional 23 of our road and armed support vehicles have been fitted with the latest tracking technology from Tracker. This has proved successful already, with a quad which was fitted with Tracker stolen in the Crumlin area being recovered in Glenarm. Under the heading Reassurance, in addition to the engagement events outlined above, police officers and our CPOs engage with farmers at UFU offices, livestock marts, on their farms and through the Farm Watch rural text alert schemes. Farmers are encouraged to sign up to their local Farm Watch scheme to have property security marked, receive signage for display at the roadside or on their laneways, and to be part of the local text alert scheme. Rural MPT teams use their PSNI Facebook sites to post information and appeals in relation to rural crime in the area and to inform followers of recoveries and arrests. In relation to organised crime, I anticipate the committee will be interested in any involvement in agricultural crime by organised criminal gangs. Assistant Chief Constable Horace has previously briefed the Policing Board, the Crime Operations Department, in association with colleagues in Garda Síochána and the National Crime Agency, is investigating organised criminal gangs involved in plant theft. These are complex investigations and are ongoing. Colleagues in district policing, including response officers, MPT officers and detectives, are also progressing investigations into rural crime. In respect of the border districts, this involves regular contact and liaison between officers on both sides of the border. Some specific issues the committee asked us to address are firstly, rural crime statistics, and I understand that the latest quarterly update to the end of March 2014 and covering the financial year 13-14 has been supplied to members of the committee. Secondly, radio reception in the Glens of Antrim. I'm accompanied by a colleague from our Information and Communication Services branch who will address any concerns that the committee may have on this issue. Thirdly, Tracker and the CSER initiative. A total of 119 devices were fitted during this initiative, 106 Tracker units and 13 CSER units, as a result protecting over £1.7 million worth of machinery. When comparing January to March 2014 with October to December 2013, the number of machinery thefts in E District reduced from 24 to 23, while the number of machinery thefts in F District reduced from 17 to 3. The Rural Crime Partnership is in discussion around extending this initiative to the other 4 rural districts, namely C, D, G and H. The fourth issue was in relation to the operation, the alleged illegal slaughter of animals, and obviously we've just had a comprehensive briefing from colleagues in Food Standards Agency and DARD in relation to that issue. 5. The implementation of the Welfare of Animals Act 2011. This Act commenced on the 2nd of April 2012 and placed responsibility for enforcement of the welfare of domestic animals such as dogs, cats, horses, etc. with the local council animal welfare officers. Responsibility for the enforcement of the welfare of farmed animals continued to rest with DARD, while PSNI retains responsibility for the investigation of organised crime involving animal fighting, such as dog fighting and badger baiting, and the enforcement of any wildlife crime involving illegal poaching of protected birds and plants. PSNI has a good working relationship with the AWOs and local councils and officials in DARD, and the 2011 Act, while still in its infancy, is working well. An MOU is being developed between PSNI, DARD and local councils to reflect the enforcement responsibilities of the Act. Finally, number 6, in relation to Redcap's Security Solutions Limited, my letter of response to the committee was issued on Friday the 11th of April 2014, and I can further advise the committee that Mr Brown of Redcap Security Solutions Limited provided a further presentation to the Rural Crime Partnership meeting which was held this morning.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian and George. Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation and for the information you've given to us to date. I'll get straight into questions. I know that I, myself and other members of this committee had been pushing for some time for a more organised rural crime unit or task force is the words that would have been used at that time, I'm sure. And whilst we have the establishment of a rural crime unit which came into effect on the 12th of August 2013, is it not true that really all we got and all you appointed was a data analyst which basically only records the crimes and the statistics, but doesn't actually delve down into the prevention, the apprehension of these, what will be in most cases, very well organised criminals?
Well, I'll answer that first, and then Brian can sweep up any detail if there's any that I'm missing. I suppose the important thing from my point of view is to get the functionality right. This is it's a highly localised problem, and it springs up all over the place. So what I didn't want to do, and my predecessor wasn't of a mind either, was to create a task force in the terms of a tactical support type group of 30 cops that would parachute into wherever we thought the next rural crime issue would spring up. What we wanted to do was in over 50% of Northern Ireland is rural, and what we wanted to do was for local commanders to understand the impact of rural crime on farmers and farm workers in the rural community. And so therefore that centralised piece, what it could do more intelligently was to actually grab the information that was sitting in various parts of the organisation, put it into the sort of packages that you've been supplied with today. And I mean, this is basically an overview document, and it doesn't do full justice to the work of the analyst. But there are subject profiles, that is, profiles on suspects, effectively, given the full intelligence picture around them, what they have been involved in previously, trying to be predictive about what they might do in the future. And I wouldn't want you to think that the analyst is simply there to make sure that the records are kept right. Their job is much more forward-looking, much more predictive. When I go out as the Assistant Chief Constable for Rural Region to hold accountability meetings once every 4 or 5 months with the district commanders, you know, the toes are held to the fire at those meetings around what people are doing around rural crime, because although the number of crimes, relatively speaking, are small, they are high impact. They're high impact on the rural community, therefore they're high impact on the rural community's confidence in policing. So this is important to us, but what I don't want to do is actually give district commanders locally some sort of a get-out or the ability to, maybe even in good faith, to abdicate their personal local responsibility because there's some unit at headquarters taking responsibility for it. The headquarters unit is there to supply information, provide them with packages, and then I can hold them to account for what they've done with those packages. And one of the things that the analyst does is actually a results analysis as well, so that there's a little bit of internal competition, a healthy thing, whereby each of the rural districts, you know, if F District have managed to reduce plant machinery from 17 down to 3 in a 2-month period, how come F District have reduced it by 1? So what's F District doing that E District need to learn from? And that sort of thing. So there is a balance, Chair, between having some sort of centralised unit, and we could dismiss it as it's just one analyst. There's actually a constable in there as well. But I want as much as possible to enable, to empower people out there in the rural districts to go and do the business and then hold them to account for doing it. And the centralised bit is more about information management rather than going and touching the collars of thieves as such. We want that to stay local. I think that's a healthy thing.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And can I just commend the you know, I think it was F District, you said they had reduced it from 17 down to 3 with regards to machinery theft. But again, and having spent time on the DPPs and not been completely endeared to them and the functionality of them, I do know that, and I would never ever want to suggest that anyone could blame the police for crime stats or levels. Yeah. Because that's a societal issue. What you're there to do is investigate that crime. But whilst this information, this data that is being analysed and collated and collected could well go some way to showing local commanders on the ground locally the context and the prevalence and everything else, there must be a massive part of this that is organised crime that will work with no borders, will work through jurisdictions and indeed districts in this jurisdiction. And surely that cannot then be left to a local commander to police if it is across multi-districts and jurisdictions. Surely there must be something organised at the top so that we are more organised than the organised crime gangs.
Yeah. Well, organised criminality is really about two things. It's not about rural crime, it's not about cocaine, it's not about firearms or even human trafficking. And at its core, organised crime is about power and money. All of those other things are the commodities that they trade in order to gain their power and money, and actually agricultural crime is no different. So we have actually about 130 detectives in an organised crime branch centrally that my colleague ACC Harris has responsibility for. But there's absolute cross-cutting. I mean, even in the last week, partly in preparation for this committee, but it's ongoing dialogue between the Chief Superintendent in Organised Crime Branch, my office, and Brian, probably on a more routine basis. So some of what we've seen in the case that our colleagues were talking about in the previous session and so on, our Organised Crime Branch are interested in that, they're involved in it, we're trying to develop intelligence around it to see how organised it is. Not just that case, but things like that, the same around the milk smuggling as well, where you have the ability to gain about £35,000 sterling on one load of smuggled milk because of the quota system, then that's always going to be attractive to organised crime because of their insatiable desire for money and power. So I'd like to reassure the committee that Organised Crime Branch have been entirely supportive and cooperative with the districts, and they are actually represented in that gold group that I talked about that I chair a couple of times a year, just to make sure that we're all facing in the same direction. A big organisation of 10,000 people, it's easy for people to run off doing their own thing, and the idea of that gold group is strategically to pull together all the activity to make sure that information's been shared and that people are going in the same direction.
I want to give you an opportunity to counter allegations that would even be in my own district, North Antrim, in my own constituency, whereby farmers have been putting, I suppose, massive pressure on the police over the last number of years in sporadic periods, especially when the crime levels have went up and down, that there may well be some individuals who may not even be that well organised that have been allowed, if you like, to get away with certain rural thefts and crimes because they may well be given information to the police on other cases. How would you counter that?
Well, nobody is above the law, and I would say that that does not happen. I mean, it's a worry, it's a concern that I have heard, not just in the realms of rural crime, agricultural crime, but right across the piece. Are people protected because they're giving information to the police? What I would say is that the relationship that the police develop with people who give information to us is very tightly regulated. The Office of the Surveillance Commissioner comes in once a year, does a very in-depth assessment, and that then provides a report to the Chief Constable and to the Policing Board about the integrity and the compliance with the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. So someone's involvement in crime under that legislation it has to be on the periphery of crime. So it's not as if people will be going engaged in widespread crime and all the rest of it. That simply is not permissible. It's outside the law. Police officers that I know that deal with these, apart from their own integrity, are not going to sacrifice their pensions by operating outside of that, quite frankly. From the reports that I have seen from the Office of the Surveillance Commissioner that oversees all of that world of information giving to police and all the rest of it, that covert world, I'm satisfied that there's a degree of integrity and compliance that is reassuring. It's hard sometimes to give the detail of that into the public domain, but I suppose the job of the police is to give enough information that provides people that the reassurance is there. And if people on a specific case suspect that, then what we would actually encourage them to do is to go to the police ombudsman, because the police ombudsman also has the power on a case-specific issue to come in and look at a person's status, to look at what they've been involved in, to look at the quality of the investigation, and if they weren't pursued, why were they not pursued? And that's probably the most reassuring thing that someone could do if they have that suspicion, to I suppose, instigate that level of scrutiny through the Police Ombudsman's office.
Okay, thank you very much. Tom Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. 870 crimes committed in the agriculture sector. How many people have been brought to book for that? 800 for those 870 crimes.
Well, in the pack, do you want to answer that, Brian? But in the pack, I think there's 125 arrests in the same, 144 arrests in the same period. Now, a lot of them, because we're just the financial year that has just ended, bringing the book could mean more than arrest. It could be actually getting them through court and convicted and all the rest of it. So a number of those will be in train, as it were. But those are the sorts of questions that it's my job to be asking people locally to make sure that we are exploiting every opportunity we can. First of all, to prevent the crime, and then when it happens, to bring those who have done it to justice, if we can. Brian, maybe more detail around that?
Yeah, just to reinforce what has been said, the crime statistics for Northern Ireland, for PSNI, were published there a couple of weeks ago, and that highlights the outcome rates around each of the districts and around each of the rural districts. And looking across the 6 rural districts of C District, the H District, the average outcome rate there was 29.4%. So effectively 3 in every 10 crimes occurring throughout the rural districts were had an outcome on it.
Out of the 144 arrests made, obviously then there goes a case through to the PPS. Do you find that many of the cases going to the PPS have been thrown out and not taken on to court?
Well, the PPS applied two criteria to the decision whether or not to prosecute. One is the quality of evidence there to meet the evidential threshold. Now the challenge for the police in that is, have we done everything possible to make sure that we've got as good an evidential package as we can, but sometimes even with our best efforts we can't get it to that threshold. And the other is public interest, where they would declare it sometimes not to be in the public interest to prosecute. That's their responsibility and their role, rather than that of the police. There would be individual cases here and there, frustrations that police would have around that, but we have to respect the system and respect the office of the Public Prosecution Service.
Well, there's one thing I'm glad to see is that, over a period of time you've reduced from 17 to 3 in F District. What has been done to cause that reduction? Because in F District we were plagued with farmers losing tractors and all types of machinery. And I'm glad to see that there's a reduction in that at the moment. What really has been done to cause that reduction?
Yeah, I think obviously you'll be aware, Mr. Buchanan, there's a lot of work ongoing across F District. We've some very good people there, particularly some very good neighbourhood policing teams with a huge commitment to dealing with rural crime, and rural crime prevention and detection initiatives are ongoing on a regular basis there. And I mentioned the OMA show, which is taking place on the 4th and 5th of July. But also I think what helped and made a contribution to that was the Rural Crime Initiative announced by the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Agriculture last December, whereby and through the good work of the Rural Crime Data Analyst, it was identified that the majority of crime is occurring in R, E and F districts, and therefore there was some money identified to subsidise the fitting of security equipment for farmers across those 2 districts. And as I mentioned in my introduction, there was 119 devices, mainly tracker devices, fitted across those 2 districts. There was a degree of publicity around that, and I think the work that the local officers, the local PCSPs and indeed the local farming community is doing, backed up by initiatives from the Rural Crime Partnership, are helping and making a difference. And I think it would be, I know there has been calls to extend that initiative across the other rural districts. It was discussed this morning at the Rural Crime Partnership meeting, and there is an intention to do that, and I welcome that, and hopefully that will lead to further reductions in rural crime.
Yeah, it's a success story, and we welcome that.
Chair, just on that point, I know this committee will be well aware, but there's a huge amount, I don't want to blame the victims of the crime here, but there's a huge amount around crime prevention, plant security, site security and so on that farmers in the rural community can be doing for themselves. So for neighbourhood officers in rural areas, what we are encouraging them to do is when you find a tractor or a piece of plant machinery that's sitting there with the keys in it and easily movable, go and find the farmer and have a discussion with that. Not in a lecturing sort of a way, but actually this is about the owners, the farmers and the police and everybody else taking responsibility. And there's no point in making this easy for criminals, because there may be an organised element to it, as we've discussed. There's also a large amount of opportunistic thieves out there who will grab an opportunity if they see it.
Okay, thank you. William Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My own farm was robbed a few years back, and the Land Rover and trailer actually stolen, so I know what it's like to be at the other end, and in Need District, 249 offences. Our local paper run the headline, Rural Crime Capital of Northern Ireland. Now, there is a perception among rural people that if you're insured, police is not that really interested. Now, that's a perception maybe, but it is a perception that is out there. I had one guy lost 100 sheep just about 4 weeks ago inside Market Hill. Disappointed, very disappointed in the response by police. And I can only say very disappointed, because he was. I think it was 24 hours before they came to him. Cameras a mile from the scene that a vehicle seen come past. He requested that they be checked, and I'm not so sure to this day they've been checked yet, and the times and the dates. So, if a bank was robbed in Armagh tonight of £10,000, there'd be a headline on the news. Police would be very proactive. £10,000 for the sheep stolen. There seems to be a different attitude, and this is it may be a perception, but it is a perception among farmers and among the rural community that that is the case. What would you say to that?
Well, Brian might be able to deal with that specific incident. That doesn't sound like a good news story. What I would say is, for police officers, our job is to keep people safe and lock up bad people. And whether or not somebody's insured is actually of secondary importance to those two key principles. So we have a job of work to do to convince people that the reason why we joined the police in the first place was to bring people who commit offences to justice and to keep people safe and to protect the vulnerable. So I'm disappointed to hear about your constituents or your friends' experience of the police. Obviously, we'd be happy to drill into that. In fact, I will be drilling into it to find out what the story is. But Brian, maybe you're aware of some of the detail around it?
Yes, the incident was reported on the 1st of May. It was reported to us at 10:05 in the evening, and I understand it was through agreement with the injured party that police would call the next day and record the statement of evidence. But investigations are ongoing into that incident, Mr. Irwin, and through our inquiries, through liaison with Garda Síochána, a number of those sheep were recovered in County Mayo, and the injured party has attended there, identified his sheep. So while it would obviously have been preferable that our work would have recovered all of the sheep, but a proportion of them has been recovered, and inquiries are now ongoing between PSNI and Garda Síochána into who was involved in not only stealing those sheep but transporting them.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. A small number of sheep has been, well, I'm not sure he has recovered them yet, but they've been held down south of the border in the factory or a livestock mart. I noticed something suspicious and reported it to the guards. But in request to an instances, there seems to be difficulty with instances of accessing cameras in relation to this. Police have told me in the area that they have to request, I suppose it's traffic cameras, of course, those cameras they have to request the viewing of the cameras, and sometimes that's slow forthcoming, doesn't come quick for them. So it seems, it just seems strange that when there's a robbery of that magnitude, that it takes so long, to tie the thing down and get viewing cameras and all the rest. It just seems.
We can look into that. I mean, there shouldn't be a delay on that stuff. I mean, it's not that complicated these days. We've got people with the expertise and the capacity to do it. I don't know. There seems to have been some sort of a glitch in this case, Mr. Owen, and I'm happy to have it looked into.
That's okay.
But and there's different things. I mean, there's cameras that we have. CCTV cameras in the conventional sense. Sometimes, because if they're privately owned, there is difficulty accessing them because you're reliant on the premises owner or whatever. Then there's also the ANPR cameras around the traffic movements on the road that we have full control of. So that sort of data is press of a mouse or a computer button stuff. Now, I'm not saying that all 6,500 officers are fully au fait with how to go about doing that, but actually that's something that we can look at, and if there is a problem, we can certainly rectify it. It shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, well, I've been speaking to officers on Saturday, and I was to go back to them today on that same issue, because we're getting conflicting messages now at the moment, even from officers on this. But I mean, I think it is, in my particular area, it is a large number of tractors have been stolen over this last 6 or 8 months too, and some have been recovered. In one particular instance, the farmer himself traced the tractor.
I remember.
And I mean, it did send out the perception that if the farmer can find the tractor, what's wrong, the police can't. You understand, and you can understand that perception being there,
Absolutely, and people's perception are based on their experience. So the difference between perception and reality is wafer thin sometimes. So there'll be no defensiveness from us around that. What we want to do is learn from these and make sure that we improve the quality of service in the future.
Okay.
Okay, Alderman McMullen.
Yes, Chair, thanks for your presentation. The theft of animals, in some cases the non-theft stolen animals. What happens with that when you find out there's been a report of stolen animals and you find out they haven't been stolen? I mean, there has been some cases of that. There's been a lot of time wasted in that. In that case, to my mind, nobody's ever been brought to book on that one. And how are you working with the meat plants? Because I know the theft of cattle, for instance, you can steal a number of them. But in sheep, the numbers are quadrupled, lorry loads of them. They're taken away and disposed of very quickly. So, has our method of checking the meat plants, etc., has that improved? Or how do we do that?
Well, in terms of the your second question, Mr. McMullen, as outlined in the papers, the theft of livestock represents a small proportion of the overall cattle and sheep numbers in Northern Ireland, but still has a very significant impact upon farms and farmers. I think it's also the case that unfortunately, on occasions, it can be some days in respect of cattle, or indeed some weeks in respect of sheep, before the theft is actually reported to police, and obviously that causes difficulties and challenges for the investigation. In terms of when those livestock are reported to police, we have a reporting system through to the abattoirs and through to the meat plants via our colleagues in Dart, who then communicate that information to the department in the south. But in terms of the actual inspections of the meat plants, it wouldn't be undertaken by the police service. So we have a system in place whereby we notify thefts to the abattoirs, to the meat plants, just to alert them of the fact that there has been a theft of sheep or cattle, even if it's some days or weeks after they have gone missing. And through that, we endeavour to try and stop the outlet for some of the stolen livestock getting into the abattoirs.
And has anybody ever been prosecuted through that system of contact you have with meat plants, the Garda Síochána, all of those contacts, no matter whether it's state or whatever, has anybody ever been prosecuted through that system?
I'm aware of information coming back to the police service in terms of suspicious movements of sheep and cattle into the system. I'm not aware of any specific prosecution arising from it. I am aware of individuals having been prosecuted for theft of livestock, but I don't know that originated from the process that I've just outlined.
We don't know. Right. There has been cases. Has any cases of animals been stolen again and gone back to sheep that have ended up in Scotland?
In terms of where sheep and cattle go to after being stolen, that's obviously an area that we are interested in as to what happens to them and what the outlet is. I think that yes, there is a lot of focus on the north-south and south-north issue in terms of the movement of stolen livestock, but I think that it's not unreasonable for us to assume that stolen cattle or stolen sheep could also go across the water to GB. I don't have any specific information or intelligence to say that is the case, but it's certainly in terms of keeping it up in mind as to the outlet for stolen cattle and sheep, it's a destination that we're aware of.
Okay. The other thing here is you have a system there of recording your information on computer. There's a name for that.
Niche. No?
Niche, is it?
Our command and control system.
Yeah. Can each of your police stations feed into that information, or is that done centrally?
No, that's well. There's a record management system for. We just need to make sure we're talking the same thing here.
Yeah.
For a report of a crime or somebody coming into custody or a piece of information that a member of the public gives to the police, it all goes into this. Well, this man at the end of the table here, probably a better place to talk about than me, but and that can be accessed from a BlackBerry. It can be accessed from these, which every operational police officer has. Never mind individual police stations. The individual can feed in and retrieve information from that.
That's one of the things that your police personnel have said is a barrier, the actual feeding into this information that goes into the central computer.
Well, I don't know.
That's one of the things that we had a meeting with, and that was one of the things that came up at the meeting in H District.
Right. Well, I can. You're not that long out of H District, you
know. No, I'm not. Oh, you weren't there that day.
Was I not at the meeting, Mr. Mullen?
I'm not sure what the issue is there, because that.
There is a single information system right across the organisation, as Mr. Hamill was referred to, called Niche, that all our information in terms of stolen property, in terms of stolen animals, any incident reported to the police, all goes into almost as a central repository, so that an officer in Larne can see what is being reported in Enniskillen. There isn't any sense of a separate information system by district or by
for agricultural crime.
But yeah, for all crime.
So I can walk into a police station anywhere and ask them for the stats of agricultural crime up to date and get that answer.
that will be available from area commanders in that.
Hold on, from area commanders. Can I walk into a police station and ask, as an MLA, ask for that information? Can that be given to me?
Well, that information is collated on a quarterly basis by our Central Statistics Unit at headquarters, and they produce a quarterly update document. And an example of that is the document that we have circulated to the committee for the figures up to the end of March 2014, which covers the entire financial year for 13-14. So the committee has that document. It's available to the committee on a quarterly basis.
I can't get that information if I walk into a police station. That's basically what you're saying, and that's what I'm talking about. This separating of agricultural crime from rural crime still has not been done. And that's one of the ones that's central to fighting crime.
That has been done, Mr. McMullen. We were able to separate the rural crime from the agri crime is a subset, obviously, of the rural crime, and the document to which I refer, I think, breaks that down in terms of urban crime and rural crime, and then breaks it further down into agri crime. And our Central Statistics Unit, who look after all crime statistics for all crime types right across the PSNI, and produce this document for us, and essentially use the definition from a Northern Ireland Assembly briefing paper that was published in late 2011. So those figures are certainly available.
Well, I certainly look forward to going to your next police station and asking for those figures, and they're greatly surprised if they're available, because your personnel, especially in his district, do not have access to them, for they've told us on several occasions.
Well, the reason I mentioned area commanders, Mr. McMullen, is that I supply them directly to district commanders, to superintendents, and to and chief inspectors. The actual document that you have is then loaded onto our internal PoliceNet site, so all officers then have access to it via there.
But I push a button, it's not there, and no matter how many reports you give on a quarterly basis, it's not there if you walk into the station, and that's one of the things that could speed up the detection of crime. Now, my last question is, very last one is, there was a couple of cases there of disposal of dead animals in Carrickfergus.
Sorry, Chair, just before we leave that, I take it you've had this document that we've produced.
Yeah, no, it's in the packs.
Because sounds like self-praise, but I think the quality of that document pulls together. That's the one for the end of the financial year, but it's produced quarterly. And there's no reason why you, as an MLA of an interest in rural affairs and a member of this committee, couldn't have that. That's you're very welcome to it. But help us with what we're doing.
It's page 61 of our packs.
Right. So, are you with me?
Are you with me? What do you think I'm reading off here?
I know, but
I have it up here, and to say that if I was interested in rural crime, I take that as a very disparaging remark. I have been in your stations on quite a number of occasions in his district, as is noted, and I've talked to Mr. McKee here as well, and his predecessors on the same point, on your information system on your computer.
Right.
Where your own staff have told me that they can't do that there, that it's too long of a process to get the information out. That's all I'm saying to you. I haven't made any disparaging remark about your report. As a matter of fact, if you had waited, I would have told I was going to congratulate you on your report. Very much so. But to say your computer system is your own staff are having problems getting the information out quickly. You did say it was brought into your system, brought into your staff, went out to your area commanders. I've no reason to disprove that, but it should be there quicker. You can get all the crime stats within your computer system by your own personnel by going into the computer and getting it out very quickly. You can't do that with agricultural crime because it's mixed in, as you've said yourself, with rural crime. And it's just separating and getting it, taking a separate program into your computer system. That's all I'm saying.
Sorry, can I seek clarification? Is this for the individual police officers on the ground finding this information, or is it for a punter just walking up, a member of the...
Where if I walked in or if you walked in, Chair, and asked for crime figures like that, the personnel in the stations would, if they didn't have those reports, would have trouble getting it up on the computer because of the computer system.
It helps, Chair. I think maybe the point is that the stats do differentiate between rural crime and agri-crime, but we don't produce that document on a daily basis or a weekly basis. It's produced on a quarterly basis. So certainly we have the stats up to the end of March 2014, but that will then be updated at the end of June. So come sort of the first, second week in July, I will have then the first quarter figure. So we do update the agri-crime stats on a quarterly basis. Perhaps the point is we don't update it on a daily basis.
Just my last question is that thing about Carrickfergus. On 2 occasions at the same spot at the reservoir in Carrickfergus, the water plant there was a dead animal dumped there.
I don't have specific knowledge of that.
No, sir, I'm not aware of that.
We can look into that.
Would you look into that?
I'm seeing you next week anyway, or?
You're seeing me next week, yeah?
So we'll have an update for you for them.
That'll be a different one than what I'm seeing.
Oh, no, but
if you
I
could
don't have
do,
that
because
information just to hand. So.
it's caused a wee bit of concern around
Yes.
there. There's people concerned that dead animals, though it didn't happen here, it could get into the water table,
Of course, yeah.
that sort of thing, and it's happened a couple of times there in the same place.
Okay,
Thanks,
Joe
Chair.
Byrne, Deputy Chairperson.
Yes, Chairman, I welcome the presentation and apologies for being able to start. In relation to F District, I want to record my thanks to the outgoing District Commander who's recently left, Colin Shields. I welcome the fact that the number of offences in F District has gone down by 20. But is there a particular reason why in F District rural crime is measuring up at 47%, which is a very high level? Secondly, in relation to convictions, many people have gone to jail. What are the level of fines that have been handed to those that have stolen tractors at 40,000 plus? And lastly, in relation to neighbourhood policing, Mr. George said
Yes.
about how good neighbourhood policing is. Yes, I agree, they are. But what's the relationship between neighbourhood policing and crime branch? Because if we don't have crime officers going out there seriously intent on gathering the evidence, putting a professional file together and present it to the PPS, then we're all filling ourselves.
Just make the call.
Well, on the last point, the neighbourhood officers hopefully will have the access into the detectives either locally or through the organised crime branch if we suspected that something was more organised than simply opportunistic, and that's the way it should work. If there are specific instances where there's been a breakdown in that, happy to look
Can I
at
ask you a
it.
supplementary? If, let's say, a farmer witnessed the theft of a tractor and reported to the police, and it's neighbourhood police that comes out,
Yes.
somebody from crime branch arrays for a week, is that acceptable?
It doesn't sound acceptable to me, no. And if there are specific instances like that, then please, we're happy to have them and look at them to either put them right or to ensure there's no recurrence. Do you want to talk to the other piece?
Yes, well, I think as we have alluded to during the presentation, during the discussion, there's no doubt that the majority of agri-crime occurs across E and F districts, and I think as you've alluded to, somewhere in the region of 50% occur in those 2 districts. Having said that, that is also somewhat relative and somewhat proportionate to the number of farms in those areas, and that the vast majority, I think around about 56% of farms are across E and F district. But setting that aside, undoubtedly those are the 2 districts with the most number of agri crimes, and that's why we do a lot of work through our crime prevention officers, through our neighbourhood officers, through response officers and through detectives in those two districts, and why the Rural Crime Partnership security marking initiative was targeted specifically at E&F district, with plans now to roll it out across the other districts. In terms of their detections and or convictions, again within the papers, there's some of our operational successes have been outlined, and as Mr. Hamilton referred to earlier, we have made 144 arrests in the last 4 years in relation to agri crime. Looking at rural crime across the 6 rural districts, the outcome rate within our crime statistics that were published on the 12th of May, I think it was, identified that across those 6 districts there was an average outcome rate of 29.4%. So we are making inroads into agricultural crime, into the wider rural crime, or crime that occurs in rural areas, but much of that is led by the information that we get from the rural community, and I regularly appeal to the rural community, and as I said in my opening remarks, there's nobody like the farming community who knows what is unusual and what is suspicious in their area, and we encourage them to report those instances into us on an ongoing basis as they occur, because lifetime reporting of that suspicious behaviour and activity significantly increases our chances of making a successful arrest.
Thanks, John.
Okay, you happy enough? No further questions, gentlemen. So again, thank you very much for your time here and your evidence to us. It's been very, very worthwhile and very, very productive. So thank you very much for your time. I know you are all very, very busy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much now. Okay. Can I refer members to press releases on page 102, 104 of your pack? Can I seek agreement for the press release to issue on this issue? Are members content? Members content? Yeah. Okay, moving on then. Can I jump then to agenda item number 9? It's a decision that has to be made. And that is agenda item number 9, the Public Bodies Abolition of Food from Britain Order 2014. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 140 and 141, and the papers from the department at pages 142 to 161. Can I advise members that pages 149 to 159 have been marked restricted? Can I advise members that the department advised the committee in September 2013 that there was to be a UK-wide consultation on the DEFRA proposal to abolish Food from Britain, FFB. This body has been non-operational since 2009, and its role has been carried out by InvestNI since then. Therefore, its abolition is considered to have little impact here. The consultation saw only one response from Northern Ireland, and it was in support of the abolition. Action to abolish the FFB is being taken forward by ways of Westminster Order under the Public Bodies Act 2011 and requires the consent of the Assembly. Before that can happen, the Department is seeking the views of the committee on this issue. Following this, the Minister will then table a legislative consent motion so that the Assembly can officially agree the abolition of the FFB. Can I refer members to the draft motion on page 141?
Chairman, is the department advising this abolition?
Yes, they are, yeah. Can I seek comments? From the members? If none, I will put the committee is asked to indicate that it is content with the draft motion on the abolition of Food from Britain, which will be tabled by the Dard Minister as soon as committee approval is obtained. The draft motion will be that this Assembly consents to the Public Bodies Abolition of Food from Britain Order 2014 in the form of the draft laid before the UK Parliament on the 6th of May 2014. Are members content with the draft motion? Okay. Can I advise members that the committee memorandum has to be placed on the Assembly website to record the view of the committee? If members are content, this will be included in the meeting pack for next week, seeking committee approval. Are members content with this approach? Content? Yep. Okay. Thank you, members. Okay. We'll then go back to agenda item number 7, which is the pre-consultation review of the NAP, which is Nitrates Action Programme 2011-2014, renewal of the Nitrates Directive proposed NPA 2015 to 2018. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 106, 107 and papers from the department at pages 108 and 115.
We're going to lose Gordon.
Chairman, I have a topical question.
You have a topical question, yes. Oliver, you're having a cup of tea? Aye. That's fine.
We're back.
And we're still okay for quorum then?
Try and chase someone back.
Yeah, we're okay. Okay. I thought you were starting a standoff there, Oliver, when you stood up there. Can I advise members that the Scientific Working Group has produced a report on the review of the Nitrates Action Programme 2011-2014, which has been forwarded to the EU Commission for discussion. The Commission has raised a number of issues which will be further considered in the review process. For the proposed NPA 2015-2018, Department intend to undertake a public consultation in conjunction with the DOE in June 2014, and it is expected that the proposed draft regulations will come before both this committee and the Environment Committee in late 2014. A meeting of stakeholders will be held in May prior to the consultation launch. The Commission will have to be satisfied that there is an acceptable action programme in place, and the application is run in parallel with the current review of the Nitrates Action Programme. Can I seek comments from members?
I think, Chairman, given the concern there is about nitrates and the concentration of nitrates in Northern Ireland, that we should proceed on that basis.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Are members content then that we seek a briefing on the review of the Nitrates Action Programme 2011-2014 when the Department has finalised its consultation of the 2015-18 programme before bringing it to the EU Commission seeking derogation?
Can't make a decision because there's only 4, but if members are, I can guess that they're generally content, I can guess that that'll be okay, that nobody's going to.
Okay.
Make a working assumption, Chairman.
Working assumption.
I can certainly speak for my party. Okay. If you want, even if we reach quorum.
There we go.
There we go. So, okay. Are members content then that we seek a briefing from the review? Right. On the review, sorry? Okay. Thanks. Agenda item number 8. Then SL1, the Foot and Mouth Disease Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2014. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 116 and papers from the department at pages 118 to 138? Can I refer members that the rule will be laid before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation in June 2014? Currently the regulations are contradictory to Council Directive 2003/85/EC, which states that if there is an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the Republic of Ireland, the protection and surveillance zones should be centred on the outbreak. Currently the zones are at least 3 kilometres or 10 kilometres from the border. The regulations will correct this and will also correct the typo by replacing the word contemporary with the word temporary. As the amendments are technical only, there is no requirement to consult on the regulations. Can I seek comments from members? Are members content with the merits of the policy as outlined? Okay, content. Okay, thank you, members. Okay, moving on now to agenda item number 10, which is the consideration of amendments to the Reservoirs Bill. Okay, can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 163 to 165 and correspondence from the department at pages 166 to 180. Can I advise members that the purpose of this session is to consider the amendments that Rivers Agency has put forward and seek agreement or otherwise on them. It will also be the last opportunity for members to indicate whether they wish to see any further amendments or to seek clarity on any issue. Next week we hope to be commencing the formal clause-by-clause stage of the bill, and by that stage it will be too late to seek clarity. So can I ask that members give this session their full attention, consider if they have any other amendments, and remain in the room for the duration of this session. Can I welcome to the committee David Porter, Director of Development, and Kieran Brazier, Head of Bill Team. You're very welcome, gentlemen, to the committee again, as always. Members may wish to have their copy of the bill and other relevant documents open in front of them for this part of the meeting. Can I refer members to the clerk's memo at pages 164? Rivers Agency has provided 3 positions for us as follows. Amendments that are being recommended to the Minister and which we have in front of us for consideration today. This is Annex B, B1 and B2.
2 table documents.
And the 2 table documents that are before you now. We will look at these shortly. Amendments that are being worked on for recommendation to the Minister. We had hoped to see these today. These are at Annex C. And we will have a short discussion on why we still do not have these and when we can expect to have them, if we can have them later. Finally, at Annex D, amendments the Rivers Agency has decided against. We will be discussing these in some detail later as well. Can I just say off the top of this, David and Kieran, whilst I know that you've had a massive body of work to do with regards to these amendments and other concerns that the committee has, we felt that there was considerable time since the last time we met in order to have these produced for us, in order that they could go in the pack, in order that we could have had a number of days to peruse, to assess them. That has not been the case for a lot of these, and indeed we have only received tabled copies today, and also then one placed in front of us basically there now. Now, whilst I do know that there has been a lot of work and looking at this main amendment, and as it's going through all the subsections and sections, I realise that there is a massive body of work there, but yet we felt that there was sufficient time since we last met, given that we didn't meet last week, to have this before us in good time. I do consider it to be bad form that we haven't had it before us now. So I'm putting the marker down because I do think that in order for us to scrutinise and assess this legislation and give it the time it deserves, we are really against the 8 ball if we're only seeing it in front of our laps here now.
Yeah.
I'll let you come in on that.
Yeah, no, your point's accepted. However, I would say that what we have been trying to do is to, first of all, clear and get all the amendments drafted. I can tell the committee that we have them all drafted. We found ourselves in a position where there were some that we could release because they were within our gift, that we weren't reliant on approvals from others. And so that's what we prioritised and got those to you first. We've continued to work on, particularly on Clause 120, and the reason why we didn't give it to you was because, as you've identified yourself, was because of the complexity of it, that we wanted to make sure what we were putting forward was as accurate as possible, albeit the thrust of what we have agreed in terms of the clause has not changed at all. It was just purely the amount of work of going back down through the bill and checking every single clause to see whether it should have been in and out. So part of that was just maybe our diligence and our not wanting to put something forward that was not 100% accurate. The items that we haven't been able to release, as I say, we have them drafted. We are just dependent on others, and there is a sensitivity. So I'll use one of the examples where we're writing into the bill that the Office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister may do something by regulation. Well, quite clearly we need to get that cleared. We can't just put that amendment forward and then somebody hear that in legislation they're going to be required to do something. And there is a process there that we are not in control of. So I do have to beg your indulgence with us. We are really focused on getting them to you so you can continue with your formal clause by clause next week. That is our absolute target, and we're doing our absolute best.
Okay, I understand. Would it be in order to send out a text message just to remind everyone that we've just started the commencement of the reservoirs bill, because there may well be members who haven't realised we've got this point at this time. Thank you, Stella. Okay, we will look at first at the amendments that are being recommended to the Minister and which we have in front of us for consideration today. Can I advise members that Rivers Agency are now in the position of recommending 2 amendments to the Minister. They are Clause 22, matters to be taken into account in relation to risk designation. That's at pages 171 and to 174 of your packs, and Clause 252K and 334I. Frequency of visits by supervising engineers at pages 174 and to 176. Should we go through these one by one, basically, and you can explain on them?
Yes,
That'd be okay. Members agreed? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Here.
Yeah. The first one, Chairman, is clause 22. Specifically, clause 22(3)(e) at the top of page 13, and 22(4), which is just beneath it. The Examiner of Statutory Rules drew the committee's attention to this clause and suggested that there was two regulating powers that seemed very similar. That 22(3)(e) was not subject to consultation with the institution of engineers, and that both regulations were by negative rather than affirmative procedure. Whenever if made, the regulations would be quite crucial to the bill. This relates to matters that need to be taken into consideration when given a risk designation to a reservoir. So the first part of that regulation talks about consequence, and the second part talks about probability.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We considered this. The Examiner's Statutory Rules was suggesting that maybe that one regulatory power could be introduced there. And we considered that. But what he was keen was that if we retain both regulatory powers, that both of them would be subject to consultation with the Institution of Civil Engineers. We have decided to keep clause 22(3)(e), such other matters as the Department may regulation specify, and that was to give transparency to that part of the bill around probability. Probability, I know, and consequence have been featured large in the discussions with the committee throughout our time here. And we didn't want to remove anything from that people might think that we're trying to slip something through in another regulation. So we wanted to be clear that other matters that the department might want to take into consideration when looking at the probability of a reservoir failure, that we would make that by regulation, and we would make that by regulation under 3E. 4 gives us the regulating power to control what other matters are to be taken into consideration in the clause, in the overall clause. And so we wanted to retain that as well. But crucially, we've agreed that that these regulating powers are by affirmative resolution. So if we're going to bring forward any regulations in terms of 3E or 4, we will do so, and we will bring that forward to the Assembly, and we will also consult on both parts of that regulating power with the Institution of Civil Engineers before we do so. So we're going to retain 3E, we're going to retain 4, but we're making sure that in retaining both of those, they're by affirmative rather than negative resolution, and we are consulting with the Institution of Civil Engineer before bringing forward any regulations to the Assembly in that respect.
Okay, members, is there any comments on that? It's clause 22(3)(e) and clause 22(4) and subsection 5. Thank you very much, staff.
Yeah.
Our members, any comments on that, members? Okay.
Okay.
Moving on then.
Okay.
That was. Let's see just if I'm right here where I am. What was that one?
Okay.
Here then. Yes, sorry. 22 clause 22(5)(2)(k).
Yep. And
33(4)(i). Frequency of visits by supervising engineers.
Yeah.
That's at pages 174 and 176 of our packs.
Clause 25(2)(k) appears at the top of page 15 in the bill, and this relates to the number of visits by a supervising engineer to a high-risk reservoir and a medium-risk reservoir. And it's currently drafted. It says where there's a high-risk reservoir at least twice every 12-month period, and where there's a medium-risk reservoir at least once in every 12-month period. And we discussed this at the last committee meeting about the possibility of relaxing that stipulation. We had consulted with the Institution of Civil Engineers around that, and they were agreeable to our suggestion to reduce the number of visits, the minimum number of visits on a high-risk reservoir to once every 12 months, and to change the regime for a medium-risk reservoir to a visit at least once in every 24-month period. And the amendment now reflects that proposal. It also, there's a consequential amendment to Regulation 33(4)(i), which is a couple of pages over. 33(4)(i), which is midway down page 21. If an inspecting engineer considers that the supervising engineer should visit the reservoir more frequently, again, that repeats 25(2)(k), so it needed to be amended to reflect the proposed amendment of a minimum of 1 visit to a high-risk reservoir every 12 months and a minimum of 1 visit to a medium-risk reservoir every 24 months. That's a consequential amendment, but the main amendment is in 25(2)(k).
Chairman, can I just ask a question? In relation to the high-risk reservoirs in GB or in England, is it the same sort of frequency we're on about, or are we more stringent?
Yeah.
Well, in England, there is no minimum standard specified in legislation. What they have is an implied minimum standard, so a supervising engineer has to provide an annual statement. And because they have to provide an annual statement, that means they have to. It's implied then that they have to visit the structure.
Is the annual statement for a high-risk reservoir or for all reservoirs?
Well, there's no medium designation, so.
So for all reservoirs.
Well, we're in a period of flux now at the minute, because previous on the 75, it was for all reservoirs of a certain size, irrespective of their consequence. At this minute in time, they are bringing in the amendments to that legislation, which are changing it from just a certain size to high risk and no designation, and therefore it will be for all those all reservoir structures that are designated as high will have to have an annual statement.
That's fine, John, thanks.
Any other comments on this? Now, again, this is, just to repeat, this is clause 25, 2K, and it's basically where the visit to the reservoir, where it is high-risk reservoir at least, on the face of the bill it says at least twice in every 12 months period, where it is a medium-risk reservoir at least once every 12 months period. The proposed amendment is saying where it is a high-risk reservoir at least once in every 12 months period, and in the case of medium risk reservoir, once in every 24-month period. So instead of, for high risk, instead of twice, it goes once, and in the medium risk reservoir, once in every 24 months instead of 12 months. So they've pushed it out. Any comments, members?
Chairman, I welcome the change. It's something we raised 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I welcome that.
Yeah, but Chairman, I just wonder, is it long enough? If you have someone who has spent thousands of pounds and carried out works to a reservoir, then I can't understand why it has to be visited every 12 months and a report and all done on at expense to the landowner or whoever owns the reservoir. I can't understand why that is. If someone is going to, for instance, if I take and build a house or whatever, it's not inspected, it's inspected at the time, it's not inspected then every 12 months or whatever, because there's a new dwelling, and it's the same with everything else. And I mean, if new work is done here and huge amount of money spent, I can't for the life of me understand why it has to be visited every 12 months. I think that should be extended, further, maybe once every 5 years, provided there's work done to it. It may well be different if there's a reservoir where there's no work done, and maybe there's a need there to visit that every 12 months if no work has been done at it. But I think where a reservoir where a lot of work has been done at it, I can't see why it has to be visited every 12 months and they putting further expense on the owner of the reservoir.
Yeah, I suppose this comes back to the fundamentals. One of the fundamentals around the probability / risk.
Well, and more so probably the competence. So whilst I own a house and you own a house and it was built at a time and we're relatively competent to understand if we see anything very significant changing that we would call in a builder or an engineer, a reservoir structure is not the same, because they can fail catastrophically. The consequence of failure is much, much higher, and therefore the lay person, the person that just happens to own that, is not competent to look at that on a yearly basis and give anybody assurance. You need an expert to come alongside you, and that expert, as we've described, is a supervising engineer, and their role is to work with the owner, work with the reservoir manager in order to make sure that structure is not going to cause harm. And I don't see that. I see that as less as I'm just calling somebody in and this is an expense, more as somebody that is working alongside me in order to make sure that I don't get exposed to this liability. Yeah. And I've been thinking a lot about, because particularly in terms of the 1 year, and we made the analogy to the MOT, and I've thought an awful lot about that since our last discussions, and I think we've almost got hung up on the wrong inspection. The MOT isn't what we're talking about here. The MOT is more akin to the inspecting engineer. Once every now and again, somebody that's separate from the structure, taking a look at that and signing off a certificate to say that's good to go. So that's what the 10-yearly inspection, I think, is much more akin to the MOT, where you've got a very, very in-depth check. And this supervising engineer, well, this is your garage man running his eye over the car on a routine basis to say, yeah, the oil's okay and the tyres look okay. Or on a routine basis, you get your car serviced. This is what the supervising engineer does. He stands alongside you as the reservoir manager and makes sure that your regime is okay. Takes a look at the structure to make sure that nothing catastrophic is going to happen to it and that there hasn't been change over time, because that's the bit that will catch people out. And so it's by doing this controls or limits your liability or your exposure to this. And so it's that we need to get our heads around. I've said many times, I don't mind, we can push this out further, but there's a conflict between what we write in the bill and then the contractual relationship between engineers and whether they're prepared to expose their PI insurance to liability. So if they're only seeing a structure or a reservoir manager is trying to negotiate an arrangement whereby I only want the minimum standard, no more, and we put the minimum standard as 1 in 5 years, engineers will not take that risk, because this is a relationship that they're working together with the reservoir manager to manage this risk. So to bring this forward, we have to push this out. I have no issue with that, but I would like to be clear, we may well be kidding ourselves that if we push that out to 1 in 5, nobody out there might get it. We might think that we've produced a good bit of legislation that's reduced the burden, but we haven't, because nobody will be able to actually negotiate that position.
Can I ask, whilst I take the point with regards to change and just basically monitoring and supervising rather than the inspection in a 10-year point, surely it's something that has been there for 100 years, and in all intents and purposes for the uneducated eye hasn't moved or hasn't weakened. For us now then to put a regulatory burden from now till eternity that this will have to be inspected supervised with an inspection once every 12 months. Surely there can be, whilst that one person sets eyes on that structure once, and then whilst that person would set eyes on that structure twice, and then 3 times, and that would be over a period of 3 years, and if there is no movement or no difference or no concerns raised at that point, well then is it not the case to say that, okay, this has not just been a snapshot, this has not just been a once, we've looked at it and that's it, and we can't really identify change that's taken place over the last 20 years. But whilst they have built up now a record of maybe 3 years with 3 inspections, surely then that would be the time to say, well, okay, we have scrutinised it and studied it for a period of 3 years. It has not moved. We do not suspect it to be moved in the next 5 years. Surely is there anything that we can, whilst to take your point with regards to putting it out to a wider point, nobody will touch it with regards to engineering work, is it a case that we could do something whereby we could impose for greater scrutiny at the start, and then whilst something doesn't move or cause concern, then process that out to a wide. Now, I don't know how you write that. I don't know how that works in practicalities, even for the engineering world. But you understand what I'm saying? That I can understand if I go and look at something once, I don't know whether that's changed or what it looked like. But if I go back the following year and I see it, I know it hasn't changed. And in the following year, so whilst there would be, you could put a burden of scrutiny on it at the start, you then would relax that once you realise that there maybe is no concern. Now the impact is still there, and unfortunately the word high risk, is still used, but you're lessening the burden of regulation because you have scrutinised it and monitored for that intense period. Is there anything that can be done there? Because that to me would sound like, if you like, some sort of compromise whereby you may well be able to bring in the engineers, but yet if landowners and reservoir owners seen that once we go through a scrutiny period, then things will be able to relax if and when they do or pursue a certain line of work.
Yeah, and in essence what you're describing is exactly how we think this will operate. That initially the first inspection will then say, here is the maintenance regime, here is what we want in terms of the supervising engineer, in terms of visits, and in many cases it will be much greater than this, because an inspecting engineer will go out and say, there are no records of this, we don't know whether this leakage is new or whether it's old, we don't know what volume of material has been removed from this, therefore initially you don't get the minimum. We are requiring a supervising regime of 3 or 4 times a year until such times as we are satisfied that yes, that has been for a long period of time, yes, that settlement happened a long time ago and there's been no further movement, and therefore we can relax it. So I agree 100% that that's exactly what we're trying to write in. Our difficulty is the level it comes down to. So I'm comfortable that it will go up higher from this and then come down to this. Whether we want to try and be more specific in that, the problem with being more specific is there are lots of structures out there that I suspect on day one will achieve this, because an inspector engineer will go out and look at it and be relatively comfortable with a bit of clearing and a bit of minor works that, yeah, your dam is okay and not cause for concern. So by specifying a higher standard than this initially might actually put a burden on those people whose structures don't necessarily need additional. And so there is that flexibility is already built in it. And it comes down to whether we collectively are comfortable with this as the minimum standard. As I say, I have no problem pushing this out further if we want in legislation. I'm not sure that it's that much of a benefit in terms of what people will actually be able to negotiate in contractual terms. But I wouldn't like this to be a sticking point in terms of the bill. I think there are much more fundamental and much bigger issues that we need to talk about as opposed to this. And if we do need to relax a little bit further than that, I'm quite happy to do that. But I'm only doing it because I think that if that would help get the bill forward, I'm not sure that's really helping the people out there, the reservoir managers.
So basically what you're saying is that in practical terms and in practicalities that may not...
It may not deliver. And I think it's also worthwhile remembering what the institution said whenever they were here. David McKillen said whenever it was 2 visits a year that their firm would be doing that for about £1,000 a year. So I suspect a single visit and the oversight of a supervising engineer, I'm not going to bind them contractually, but I would guess it would be £600 a year people are talking about here. Now, if you have £600 a year on a high-risk structure, that the consequence of failure is 1,500 properties downstream, the release of water, I think we would find it difficult in the event of failure to say, actually, saving 1 inspection every other year was actually a benefit. If something could have been spotted that sooner.
Yet we don't really know what the impact will be because the initial audit.
No, well, we know exactly what the impact will be. The impact isn't in question. What we don't know is the probability of that occurring, because what we have is flood inundation maps, which very clearly show 66,000 people. What we don't know is the probability of that occurring,
or the impact. Whilst the inundation maps show the blue, we don't know the force or the runoff or the trickle that blue will be. So we don't really know an impact.
But we've accepted that, and that's why, because that's not an issue because we have high and medium. So we've said, irrespective of that, we know that we have that bit of work to do, but we don't need to know all those answers because we have this step. And we know that the ones in that lower step are the ones that's going to be lower water. We don't know which ones those are, but by the time we get this enacted, we will know that. So as a fundamental, as your ability to scrutinise the bill shouldn't be compromised by it, because it's there. You have that differentiation between high and medium. The question is, are you just comfortable enough with the differentiation, or do you want to keep high risk at 1 in 12 and push out the medium to once every 3 years or something like that? I think that's maybe as far as you would be comfortable with going. But again, whether you're actually helping anybody in real terms, because I'm not sure if they'll be able to negotiate that contractually.
Okay, any further comments on this clause? Go on ahead.
Chairman, I don't want to go against the sentiment of what Thomas said, because I said I welcomed change.
I know, absolutely. No, I understand.
I'm not prescriptive on the final outcome.
The willing of amendments, no, I understand. I understand. I got what you want. I got what you wanted to say. Any other comments on this with regards to the specifics of it? Once in every 12 months for high risk, at least once. Sorry, I should say at least. At least is the key here. At least once in every 12 months, as opposed to at least twice in every 12 months for high risk, and at least once in every 24 months, as opposed to at least once in every 12 months. Any further comment?
No. Mr. Chairman, I had also concerns, but I'm open to. But I've always, and I've said it a number of occasions, that seems, as the chairman I think said earlier, there has been no inspections for umpteen years, maybe 50 years, maybe 100 years. And all of a sudden we need so many. It just seems over the top to me, But it's the practicalities of making it work is where is the problem. And being overboard some burdensome is the you know, and I mean, hopefully we don't live to regret, you know, some of these things, you know. Yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it there. We'll move on. Opinions have been voiced, and again, this has always been one of those fundamentals. So it may never ever be resolved. Okay, can I also refer members then to, still I'll just ask you to make sure I don't miss one here, but can I also refer members to amendment up to clause 177, which occurs as a consequence of the amendment to clause 22, and this is Annex B3, which has been tabled.
Clause 117 is at the top of page 70. Specifically clause 1173. This contains a list of orders or regulations that can only be made when a draft of the order or regulation has been laid before and approved by a resolution of the Assembly. I'd referred earlier to clauses 22.3e and 22.4 that were negative resolutions that are now proposed to be draft affirmative, and the amendment to clause 1173 takes account of that. So it's a technicality, if you wish, but that clause takes account of that. I should say that there is a possibility of further amendments to that clause as a result of other works that we are continuing to do that aren't yet completed. But if we find that there isn't any further amendment to that, then we will let the committee know immediately. We know that. But as it sits at the moment, clause 1173 takes account of the fact that those two clauses, 22.3e and 22.4, the regulations therein will be made by affirmative resolution and are added to the list at 117.
Okay. We'll go with 117 then itself later on, won't we? The wording, right, okay.
Well, it's an amendment to it.
Yeah, okay. Clause 120 then, which is the one that we have received just immediately before we started the briefing. Are members content to have it in their hands? Oliver, are you happy enough there? It's not the table pack, no, it's an additional paper now.
Yes.
It's maybe there beside that, yeah. Right. Okay, this looks very, very busy.
Yeah. And that's why I think I'll start, and then if you need the detail, Kieran can go through the detail.
Yes, no, that's great.
What this does is it introduces the pause that we talked about.
Yes.
And so what we've done is we've gone through the bill and we have identified those items which are phase one, i.e. we need immediately. So that is registration, the appointing of an inspecting engineer and getting that initial inspection report. Those are the fundamental things that we needed in phase one. Phase two are then all the recurring burdens within the bill. And what we have here is then a complex list of all the recurring items. So we've had to go through the bill and work out, is that phase one and is that phase two, and then draft this. The most important bit is the words at the top of the page, where it says no order may be made under subsection 2 in respect of the following provisions unless a draft of the order has been laid before and approved by the resolution of the Assembly. That's the single most important bit. So this is not a pause that I have control of. This is a pause that you have control of, and I think that's the bit that we really need to concentrate on here. So we will, whenever we bring forward the reservoir bill and it gets on the statute book, the only issues or the only things that we will be able to do is to get the registration and to get the first inspection. That will then allow us to work out whether there is a problem here. If there is a significant problem, put a paper to the Minister, potentially go to the Executive with this, and potentially deal with some of the issues. And only then, whenever we have quantified that, will we then be able to bring back the rest of the bill, that phase 2 bit of the bill, and ask the Assembly then to take that forward. And so that pause isn't for the department to be in control of, it's for the Assembly to be in control of. So, and that's the point that I want to draw out of it. If you want, Kieran can take you down some of the more detail, but I would question just how useful that would be, unless there's particular issues that you want drawn out of, because it's basically taking the whole bill and working from one bit to the other. So, but we're quite happy to do that if that's what you want, Mr. Chair.
No, I think I'm happy enough with the. If you could just keep it at the higher level again, and David, I do apologise because I was listening to two directives there, or orders there at one time, and I know members have just walked in also. You just go again and tell me precisely, this basically will cause a halt to, or pause to the bill that will not be enacted until the Assembly is satisfied.
Will that be commenced?
When it will, they will have the power to commence.
That's correct.
And that will be basically on the information that is gleaned and gathered from the audit as to the actual context of the problem and the scale of the problem.
Yeah. So that allows us, I think, both to get what we wanted out of this.
Yes.
So your argument has been you haven't enough information to scrutinise the future requirements of it. So we have said, okay, let's build in a pause then, let's get that information. My argument has always been, I'm not going to get that information because it shifts the fundamental responsibility, and this doesn't change that. So we both get to a point where we get that information to be able to assess the recurring bits of this bill. And the button isn't pressed on the recurring bits of it unless we take the draft orders, and those have been laid before and approved by the resolution of the Assembly. So it's not for the department to call by secondary legislation. It has to come back to the Assembly.
And explain to me then the mechanics of that. What is it? What is the draft, a drafting of the order? What does that entail?
Right.
If I bring you back to the clause, because I know that you're at a disadvantage because you don't have how the clause will read in front of you.
Yes.
Neither do I, but I can help you through this. Clause 120 at the top of page 71 is the clause that sets out how the bill will be commenced. Clause 121, subsection 1, says all of the parts of the bill that will come in royal assent. So when the bill receives royal assent, clauses 1, 2, 5, and those numbered there will come in together with clause 120 and 121. That's how that reads, and that doesn't change. Clause 122, as the bill is currently drafted, says that all other parts of the bill can be introduced as and when the department decides to. Okay, that is the bit that's now been changed because this amendment introduces clause 2A, and those clauses listed under 2A that you have in front of you would otherwise could be contained in clause 122 that says these are the clauses that the department could otherwise bring in whenever it feels fit to do so. So this clause now says, well, actually it can't. It can bring in all those clauses under royal assent, and it can bring in all the other clauses except for those listed in, and that is a crucial bit. This is where the recurring parts of this bill are contained. For example, additional inspections by an inspecting engineer, all of the recurring stuff. Actually, the works that would be required to be undertaken by following an inspection report. So we're actually bringing in saying, well, you will commission an inspecting engineer. It doesn't, you'll commission an inspecting engineer and he will give you a report. Now the rest of the bill as currently drafted says, and you see when you get this report, if there's directions in that report, you will follow them, and if you don't, then we will wonder why and talk to you about all of that. And that might lead to enforcement if you didn't. Those parts of the bill can only be made when we bring that forward as a commencement order and list those parts of the bill in a commencement order and bring that forward to the Assembly for draft affirmative resolution. So you actually have to vote that part of it in, rather than us bringing forward as negative and saying, well, actually, if you don't say anything, you don't look at it, then it'll come in naturally on the date. So you actually have to, the Assembly has to physically and consciously agree that these parts of the bill will come in. That power no longer rests with the Department once we introduce this amendment.
But who then is responsible for bringing that forward to the Assembly? Would that be the Minister?
Yes, the Minister will.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Does this then, where then, and we always talk about this audit at the start to make sure we knew the context and the gravity of the situation. Where then is the grant scheme in order to allow the people out there to employ the inspection engineer to get that initial report, which then arms you with the information, then will supply us with the information to have confidence to put this draft order through.
So as I said 2 weeks ago, in parallel to the reservoir bill, we are bringing forward a scheme to assist owners with the initial requirements of the reservoir bill, and we are doing that under the Budget Act. So it's not dependent on this legislation. It will be running in parallel, and that is the scheme. The business case for the scheme will be entirely focused on the initial requirements, completely and utterly, so that helps with that phase 1. Because by getting phase 1 done, we can then work out whether we need a capital grant scheme, which is the bit that we can't answer at this minute in time. And if we needed to bring forward that, well, then we would be bringing that forward under the provisions within this, which set out the grants 105.
Yes.
So we don't need 105 in phase 1 because we have found an alternative way of offering a scheme in order to help with the initial requirements.
Yeah,
and
that's
through
just
the Budget
basically
Act.
in.
Yeah, and as I said, we are also going to, not only have we got the amendments with the Minister, we also have a letter with the Minister to the committee giving assurance that she's going to bring forward that scheme.
And that's, we talked about the budget, the budget bill, and that's being uploaded into that at the present time.
Yes, correct, yes.
Do you have any sort of indication with regards to how much financial assistance has actually been applied for, or is it just a...
Yeah, well, all this is predicated on us getting an approved business case.
Yes.
However, what I am prepared to say is we have to give indicative figures of the quantum just purely for budgetary purposes, and we have given an indication that we think that we need in and around £200,000. We think that we need that over about a 12-month period, and we are relatively optimistic that we would get the first half of that towards the end of this current business year. Now, that profile may well change, just depending on how quickly it takes us, or how long it takes us to get an approved business case, how long it takes us to actually get schemes and get people on the ground. But we can control that profile. But that's the indicative figures that we're working on in terms of the business case.
Are you then reliant before any rollout and work is done on the audit? Are you reliant then on this bill proceeding through to Royal Assent with the main amendment in place, and also the budget bill to allow it to release the money? And what sort of timescale? That will not be within a year.
Right. Well, the Budget Act, we can use that as a scheme because of the quantum and because of the nature of the work. We can actually bring that forward very, very quickly, much quicker than we could get to a grant scheme under 105, because we already have legislation there. All we're doing is setting out a scheme that the Department wishes to take forward, and subject to the Minister being content with that and us being able to demonstrate that it is value for money through a business case, well then that is acceptable, because it does get approved through the system, through DFP and through the House, through the Budget Act itself. But so the Budget Act and the scheme is not dependent on this passing, but the business case for it is.
Yes.
So the two are inextricably linked. If we didn't have this, well then there's no point in giving anybody grant aid assistance in order to prepare for this.
Doesn't exist, yeah.
We are content, we've thought about that as a risk, we're content that given the timeline of this, that's why I keep using this term in parallel.
Yeah.
In that I genuinely don't believe that it will actually have handed out much money or any money by the time that this is at a very advanced stage, and we will know whether this is going on the statute book or not, and therefore will have control over pulling the asylum if that is necessary. So this isn't required to bring forward the scheme, but the scheme and this are inextricably linked and running in parallel.
Are you then confident that obviously with the budget periods, the 31st of March 2015, that you'll be able to have that resource out, basically, before that new financial year comes down and you run into all sorts of trouble at the end of the year?
Yeah, well, what you're dealing with there is just our profiling, and provided that I can anticipate what the spend is and make adjustments to that at the monitoring round, that's normal business for the department, and we do that across not just the likes of this scheme, but every budget line that we do, we're continually juggling between different pots and different schemes in order to try and get as close to the targeted closing position as we possibly can. So that's normal business for the department. If we do need to change that profile because either it takes us a while to get the business case through or because the uptake's slower,
yes,
provided that we anticipate that, it's not lost money. We either redivert it or offer it up and it's used by another department, and then there's a subsequent carryover into the following year. But the figures in terms of the department we're talking about here are very, very small.
Yes.
You know, even as far as an agency is, our agency allocation, we can manage this, you know, fluctuations of that size relatively painlessly.
With regards to any time scales for the audit period in which you entice or encourage reservoir owners to engage, is there a time scale, time limit?
Ideally, well, there absolutely will be, because I think that's the benefit. So if you want some help, here's a constraint on that help, because we need to be able to be in a position to say there are 151 reports, therefore we can actually quantify what the overall position is. There's no point in getting 149 of them and wondering whether the two you don't have are the worst two, and you're probably no further forward than you actually we are at this minute in time. So we do need to put a constraint on that, but we also recognise that there's a bit of work for us to do in that a lot of these owners, we have seen it ourselves, are not familiar with their requirements. They will need some encouragement. They will need directed to this scheme. They may well need some help to understand what this is, and this is help in order to try and move this forward. So we do recognise that as that's a piece of work that we're going to have to do.
And whilst there is a constraint, rightly so, I understand exactly what you're saying, in order to get this gathered up, how then, what pressure is then on the engineers to conduct that work in that period of time? Yeah. And is that realistic?
Again, we're quite comfortable with that, because an inspecting engineer doesn't have to be somebody from here. So there's a long list of inspecting engineers. So it really is, and an inspection is visit that site, inspect, view the assets of the reservoir, and then write up a report. There isn't a recurring requirement where you have to be available at all times. So somebody can quite easily fly in, do that report, and if you can get a better price from some of those bigger firms that are in England, you know, I could see that being a very realistic proposition, and people coming in just to do the initial inspection. So I genuinely don't believe that will be an issue.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'll bring Joe in now.
Yeah, Chairman, I welcome the general thrust of what David's outlining in relation to trying to put a quantum of money together separate from the bill to try and issue an audit report. But I think that actually means that you're starting off from a sort of a reasonable position of understanding. And I think also looking at the comment that it'll take a wee bit of time to get all of those private owners encouraged into accepting that they do have some responsibility and that there is some help in relation to trying to get the report done.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, any other members want to comment at this stage about this? And it's basically about the main amendment to clause 120. It basically is the delaying amendment so that we can be reassured of the context and the risk. Any further comments?
Can I just clarify something, Chair, just in case it escapes your attention? That, for example, the clause we were referring to earlier, about the number of visits by a supervising engineer, just in case there's any confusion. That is not part of that will be in phase 2 of the bill because it's a recurring responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay, so but if it appears in the face of the bill, as it is, that's what, the bringing forward the commencement orders doesn't give the opportunity to amend the face of the bill. I'm just making clear that if members felt that was an opportunity for further scrutiny of the bill, once the bill's made, and the commencement orders will reflect what's in the bill.
So all the commencement order does is just commences the parts of the bill.
What's in the bill.
That it needs to be triggered.
Yes.
And what needs to be triggered is the Assembly.
Yes.
Voting on it.
Yes.
So it is as it is, whilst we scrutinise it and take it through the stages of the bill.
I didn't want members to feel that they perhaps had a
second chance to.
Yes, another opportunity at some stage to change clause 25(2)K, for example.
Yes.
So the whole bill goes on the statute books.
Yes.
Certain elements of that are on royal assent. That will start phase 1, and then phase 2 will be commenced at some future point. And it may not even be that the whole of the other requirements within the bill are commenced at that point, because, as we've said, we have future-proofed elements of this that we may not start it even with phase 2. So there could be various commencement orders or other regulations that have to be made.
Understand. Any other comments then on this, on the clause 120? Okay, no further comments at this stage. Can I just ask, on that same paper that was delivered, related amendments to clause 29, can you just clarify what that related amendment is to clause 29? It may well just be technical, but just...
It's a consequential, but can I scurry? Yeah, it's about inspection timing. It's about timings of inspecting reports and such.
Okay. And just to clarify then, phase 1, basically when this bill goes through its entirety with all the letters and words within it, as it is, or as it will be amended, what does phase 1 look like? Phase 1 will look basically what I would call, and use, sorry for my loose terminology, but basically an audit phase.
Yeah. So it will put on the statute books and commence a legal definition of a controlled reservoir. It will define a reservoir manager, that hierarchy. It will put in a requirement that you register. It will make the department the Reservoir Enforcement Authority. It will allow a public register, and it will require the appointment of an inspecting engineer and the initial inspection. And those were the bits that we've seen as that allows us to find out for sure what the 151 that we're dealing with, who actually owns those 151 and who are the reservoir managers and what condition they're in. And everything else after that is not included in phase 1 because it's the recurring elements of the bill.
Okay, are members content there? Is there any other questions out of that?
So, Chair, in phase 1, there's no cost to the person that owns the reservoir, is that right?
There is.
Well, there will be cost, but it will not be in parallel to the bill.
Yeah.
There will be a grant scheme under the Budget Act, which will give contribution towards, and we're working through the business case at the minute to work out what that contribution is, and also what the mechanism for payment of it is, and also whether we're doing it on a lump sum basis or whether we're going to pay actuals with a cap, and that's the stuff that we're going through at the minute in order to justify the business case.
Okay.
I think I said before, if you want to see, when we actually have that business case developed, I'm quite happy to come back and say that we thought it looked like this, and now we've had our thinking, this is what we've fleshed out, so I'm quite happy to do that if that would be helpful.
Okay, that would be good. Can I just advise members that the Finance and Personnel Committee will be considering the Budget Bill number 2 this week? Would members be content that we write to the Finance and Personnel Committee to ascertain the following? That provision for financial assistance for reservoir owners managers has been allowed for in the budget bill. How much is that provision for? When will the monies need to be spent by? And any other conditions, i.e. a business case and timeline for approvals? No. Are members content?
Sorry, Chair, and for how long is that money be there for?
No, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we need to flesh that out in the business case. We may well do it over a 12-month period. What the other option is, if we can get it in now, what we might end up doing is say for the rest of this business year plus the full of the next business year, because at least that keeps us within
over a 2-year period.
Yeah. So well, it would be a year and a half of practical, but it would be in 2 financial years. But it definitely isn't 2 financial years. That's unquestionable. We haven't even profiled it over 1 financial year. So the question is just whether it's over the 12 months of the second financial year or over 6 months of it, and that's again something we'll firm up. But it's absolutely over at least 2 financial years, because I don't think we could spend it, deliver it over 1.
Yeah, members content then we write to the Finance Personnel Committee on those issues, just for clarification. Okay, can I take you back then? Can I advise members that proposed amendments to the Reservoirs Bill, which Rivers Agency is not, recommending to the Minister, can be found at pages 178 of your packs, 180. Now, can I ask Rivers Agency officials to take members through the clauses which are not going to be amended at Annex D, page 178 of the committee pack? Can we start? Well, I suppose if they're recorded, the way they're listed out there,
that's not
clause 6.
No, we're not changing it.
Clause 6.8, which is the reservoir manager. Have you got that? Yeah, it would have been page. Well, it's Annex D that you produced for us. Starts off at clause 6.8 and then clause 15.1c. You happy enough, David?
Yeah, sure.
You know what you're looking at?
Yep, I do.
Yeah, just if you can take us through each one of those clauses. Start with clause 6.8, which is the reservoir manager.
Yeah, we've had a look at this again, and we are content that this is accurate. That this is the avoidance of doubt question. So work's done on a designated water course. The starting position is that we are not the reservoir manager, that has not automatically transferred responsibility to us. There may well be cases where we actually are part of the previous, because I talk about this as a cascade. But what we don't want is just that people will say, well, this is a designated water course, therefore you must own it. And this is saying, there's 2 different pieces of legislation. One is about the free flow of water, the drainage order, and the other is about reservoir safety. And unless somebody could demonstrate that we were a reservoir manager, the responsibilities on us in order to maintain the free flow of water does not relieve somebody else of that responsibility, and that's what that clause is setting out.
Okay. Clause 15.1c then?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Chair. This is in respect of a reservoir manager notifying the department of any change in ownership, and it was concerned that if the defence at 16.5 is the defence of charging proceedings for an offence under such, if the person did not know.
Yeah.
And the example, I think, from memory was that if a reservoir had changed hands through the death, or the reservoir manager had died, and the family didn't know around. First of all, clause 15.1 is at the bottom of page 7.
Yep.
And 16.5 is at near the bottom of page 8.
Yes.
And it was about that we don't intend changing that, because amending that, because if a reservoir manager dies, the responsibility for notifying the department and dies with him, and we wouldn't pursue in those circumstances. If If a reservoir manager has transferred responsibility to the reservoir to someone else, he or she should know who that person is and is then responsible for letting us know. So we just don't feel that the circumstances exist where there would be a need to amend that clause in the bill.
But 16.5, if I'm reading it right, 16.5.1 actually gives a defence.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. If that was required, if they don't know, they can say, yeah, we certainly don't know who that is. We wouldn't enforce that. We would know that beforehand, in our investigations and research into it, and we certainly wouldn't be pursuing enforcement in those circumstances.
So whilst you see the defence in 16.5, you don't feel the need then to amend 15
Yes.
1C.
Yeah.
Okay. Any comments on any of those two clauses? Okay, clause 17.2 then, giving a risk designation.
Yeah, it's around the word or the term risk.
Yeah.
And this is at the fundamentals of the bill.
I suppose there was two issues. There was a label attached, and then there was actually the regulatory burden on the labels, which are two distinct issues, because no matter what you call it, it's still going to be the same burden.
That's it.
But you did talk about changing high risk, medium risk to high impact or high
consequence.
High consequence, because even high risk, if you're told you live beside something that's high risk, it's going to bite in the bejeebers out of you. So how do you get around that, and how then can you justify keeping risk in?
Well, we did look at that to see whether we could actually change that word, and in certain aspects of the bill we could have. The problem is whenever we come then to 22 matters to be taken into account under this section, it very clearly sets out adverse consequence and probability. And that is risk. Risk is properly defined within this, because risk is impact and consequence. And if we then started to take out certain aspects and make it not risk, well, then there'd be a wholesale rewriting throughout the bill. And so, again, that's something that I've thought an awful lot about the fundamental issue about, is this risk-based? It clearly is. Our problem isn't actually about risk whenever we assess this. It's actually about the industry cannot or has not got an agreed way of quantifying probability. Whenever they do have, this legislation will accept that. Whenever they do have, if somebody then does work on a structure, has been argued quite a few times, in the future that risk classification may well change because of the way this is written. But we're trying to be as open as with you at this early stage. I cannot see an agreed probability or methodology for determining probability. It's not on the horizon that I can see it within the industry, and therefore that's where we keep coming back to. It's predominantly consequence. And again, to try and give you some comfort in that we're not just taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut, is we still have both high and medium. So if there's harm to life, that's a question for the department: is that high or medium? If we think that harm is death, well then that is high. If we think that harm isn't death, well then that is medium. And there has to be a judgment call there in the likely failure mechanism, if I can use that term. How quickly will that water be released? Where are the things that will be caused harm to without that flood inundation? And I could see a situation that even though there are properties around a reservoir, that actually we would be saying, based on the flood inundation maps, even though that property will get wet, death is unlikely.
Yeah.
And therefore we are trying to take that into account. We can't maybe do it as black and white as you would potentially like to see it, in terms of if you invest X amount into this reservoir, you get this benefit by changing down.
Yes.
But it does allow for it in the legislation. I'm being honest with you, I don't see it for the foreseeable number of years that we will actually be able to introduce something like that.
And that's a very interesting point, because you have said, well, you do have consequences, because when you do invest and you do the work that is required,
Yeah.
then your inspections will reduce.
Yeah.
But that's okay. You then also talk about. I'm struggling here to get a way of putting this. No, I'm going to come back to it. Oliver, you want in there?
Just very quickly, yes, I know you struggle with the wording of that there, but the only thing that would worry me about that categorisation is the element of insurance. Now, if somebody sees high risk, then it'll be a high insurance area for everybody living around that there. Other farmers, other whatever, you know, it could also affect possible building on that area if it's high risk, low risk. I think something needs to be built in there to give that assurance to insurance companies and to the new planning service, which will be the responsibility of local authorities, that this is only in a word. When you talk about no death and just wet, that it shouldn't affect planning in the countryside, you know, for a house on a farm, whatever, and also that it shouldn't give the insurance companies that opportunity of rocketing insurance policies.
Okay.
Where I could see that being used as a clause to do that if we didn't build something in that there to mitigate for it.
Okay. So we have two issues here. We have planning and we have insurance, and I need to deal with those differently because there are two different approaches. So planning, we have the new draft PPS 15 under FLD 5. Within the new draft, it specifically deals with reservoir inundation, and whilst in a river floodplain there's a clear presumption against, in a reservoir inundation there is not a clear presumption against.
That's in that already?
Absolutely. It's FLD 5 without the public consultation and is currently being finalised at this minute in time. Now, what it does say is that there are certain types of buildings maybe you don't want to put into it, and it actually lists essential infrastructure and homes for vulnerable people, vulnerable groups, I think it's actually termed. So if you are going to build an old people's home, well then maybe right below a reservoir isn't the best place, maybe somewhere different is. But if you're going to build a house, as I've said before, a normal dwelling house below a reservoir, provided the reservoir is inspected by somebody competent and the works identified are carried out, it is absolutely perfectly safe, as far as reasonably practicable anyway, or as far as reasonable that we can give assurance. It is perfectly safe to live below a reservoir. You just maybe want to think about the types of things you're putting in there, and that's more to do with, in the event of failure, how do you evacuate, or in the event of failure where you have critical infrastructure down below it. The pain isn't just felt in the local area, but is actually felt maybe potentially right across the province or something like that. So that I'm very content under PPS 15 and FLD 5 that is very well addressed.
Got me train of thought back again.
All right.
That's dangerous, Chairman.
Is it something with regards to the probability that you talk about that isn't here yet in the engineering world? How does that practically insert itself in the bill if it does appear sometime soon?
It's under 22 1B. So 22(1)(b).
Yeah, 22(1)(b). But what does that look like?
So that's the first place it appears. So if, for instance, that the industry agrees a methodology of assessing different types of structures, different materials, different ages, in fact, the list that's included also there under 3, where you have the purpose, the materials used, the way in which the reservoir was or is being constructed, the age and condition, and other such matters as the department may by regulation specify. So those types, if the industry comes up with something that does that, well then the bill can, without any change, adopt that.
Adopt it.
Because it says there in black and white the probability of such a release. Now, where we needed some wriggle room in the absence of that was we have written down the things that we might take into consideration.
Yeah.
Now, this will not be here's a numerical way of calculating, but in our assessment, the way we see this going forward is that there would be an assessment panel set up to look at to determine what the designations are, and that panel would look at the flood inundation map. It will also take the information from the structure and where it is, what it's constructed of, and will come up with a likely failure mechanism. And that likely failure mechanism will then determine whether you are medium or high. And that I'm not prepared to go as far as saying that is we're taking probability into account, because I know in my heart of hearts it's not a numerical probability calculation, but it's as close as I can get to it without actually having to try and get the industry to move as well.
I understand. Okay. Any other questions then on that, on the risk designation and all the aspects of that?
If I could add, Chairman, that takes us back to the clause that we were talking about at the beginning, clause 22.3e.
Yes.
Other matters of the department, we wanted to keep that in, and we wanted clearly that if we were bringing forward regulations, that was a clause under probability, that's a clause we would be bringing under, and it's draft affirmative. So again, the Assembly will be given the opportunity to comment on that.
Okay, okay. Then two other clauses then that you are not going to amend is clause 105 grants and clause 106 assessment of engineers' reports.
Yeah, well, the grant one is relatively straightforward in that the reason why we were being asked to modify this was to allow an initial grant. And so now we've found a different mechanism of bringing in an initial grant. Now this 105 doesn't need modified. So it's just because we've found a different mechanism that we don't actually add clarity with.
That's still in there.
It's still, absolutely. Because we may need it.
Yes, we may need it,
at some point in the future. So we don't want to lose that provision or that power, but we don't need to amend it to clarify that we're going to bring forward an initial grant, that we're comfortable with that.
Okay. And clause 106 then?
(106) came up about the concerns that the committee has around scrutiny of costs and scrutiny of over-engineering. We've looked at this really hard, and we're concerned, and our legal advice is that we're concerned about putting something into the face of the bill that would be considered that the department is over-regulating, or perhaps may compromise other EU law in terms of contracts, and there's just enough doubt there at the moment. We are very, very reluctant. We fully understand the committee's concerns around this, but there's enough doubts around about putting something into the face of the bill which would give the department a role where it would, have a regulatory role around monitoring costs and questioning the costs between that a reservoir engineer is charging a reservoir manager, and also the over-engineering. There's no one in the department or in government that can fulfil that role. The only people that can look at what a panel engineer is suggesting is a reservoir panel engineer, and we have included in part of the bill, the referral mechanism, the dispute referral arrangement around that. I know there's concerns around that, but if it was an easy way of putting this into the face of the bill, we would be more than happy to do that, but we are concerned that it would start to compromise the bill. We're still talking to our legal advisors on this, and we will come back when we have the stated position, but at the moment it's we're being advised against putting anything into the face of the bill in that regard.
Is that advice you've received in written form?
Yes.
And could we see it? This would be one of the main. In fact, some of the members aren't here, but I know that this is one of the fundamentals.
I know that.
So
I think the other thing that's worth saying is that we are not opposed to doing this, but administratively.
Yeah.
So if we can find a different way of doing this, and whilst we have no panel engineers, I've no problem with the agency challenging reports or the quality of reports, or if needs be the cost of reports administratively. The issue for us is putting it on the face of the bill that makes it to be a regulated function, because as soon as you go down the regulated function, well, then you need a body to scrutinise that, and I genuinely do not believe that it requires another body to be overseeing this. I genuinely do not believe that it's a problem. And I know it's hard to convince somebody of that until we actually are running the process. But certainly the experience in England is that this is not a problem.
Any comments, Oliver?
Just very quickly on that, Chair. It may not be a problem in England, where you do have quite a lot more engineers. Here we don't. That's a problem. Yeah. We did talk about flying in engineers, want of a better word, taking them in from England and all over. That's extra expense from us. We won't be faced with this extra expense. So while the legal opinion is that they don't think it's a problem, obviously they think that there's need for talking about it more, so therefore we cannot at this stage put it in there. I think we need to keep that out there till we find a way around this, because we are marginalised here where we are, and as far as the number of engineers that are suitable to do this job. And if we're going to be taking them in from elsewhere, it's going to put they're not going to come this far without extra costs. So therefore we've got to get that worked out, because anybody that has a reservoir must have an idea of the costings before it happens. Now, the likes of local authorities, it's on to stop the 11 local authorities getting together and hiring an engineer.
Yeah, that's right.
So therefore that's 11 times the cost shared out. But if you're an individual, you have that total cost. So I think, secondly, if we don't do that now, the all-powerful people within this whole bill will be the engineers. There doesn't seem to be any regulation on the engineers after what you're saying there, and I'm not doubting what you're saying. But I do think we need to go back to find some sort of regulation on engineers, because that whole bill is predicated on engineers and no control on them. And I'm not saying that in a bad way.
No, I didn't take it in a bad way. And in terms of the over-engineering, I think that is actually dealt with in terms of the quality of reports. So again, there would be no issue if somebody is specifying something that we would question them in terms of that.
But you can't question an engineer, because your own word says the only people who can question an engineer are the engineers.
Yeah. Well,
so
what
the gamekeeper would become the poacher very quick.
But what we would do in a case like that is that we would actually refer to the reservoir committee of the institution, and their role is not to produce a report, not to be a supervising engineer, not to be an inspecting engineer, but they are the gatekeeper that allows those competent people onto that list and gives a recommendation to us for putting people onto a panel, and they would take a dim view of somebody over-engineering or overcharging, and from a professional point of view, they would then bring a penalty against an engineer if they are doing that, and that routinely happens, not in terms of reservoirs, but in terms of all other engineering functions. So it can even be, and I'll give you an example of one that I read up recently, an engineer who had not agreed a price beforehand, then a private individual got a bill that they weren't larger than they were expecting. They complained to the institution about that, and the institution then, that engineer had to appear before the panel, had to give justification for that, and actually was charged then with a disciplinary offence under the thing. So there are other ways of getting them rather than just through the bill. The other issue that I want to just really say is there has been a low number of engineers here because there hasn't been any of this work. We are now starting to see that changing. So whilst it has predominantly been from a single firm, we are now starting to see at least one other that is training a supervising engineer as we speak. In fact, it was Stephen Moore who was here and gave evidence. He was the trainee supervising engineer. He was from a different firm to David and to Dallin. So I think the market will develop. And
if the engineering fraternity allow those numbers to go through to be trained, now they can regulate the numbers of being trained.
Can't. No.
Now, I come back very quick. I come back to that, but come back very quickly. Do you say the committee?
The Reservoir Committee.
The Reservoir Committee. Well, there you are. Then they should be setting the fees. They should be setting all of that there. If they are the regulating authority, then they should be regulating the fee, because if somebody gets a bill and it's more than they expected, how do they know what to expect? That could be the standard rate, or it could be too high, whatever. So therefore, the Reservoir Committee should have that information. So they then should become those people with that information. So I think maybe we've hit on on how to get around it.
Yeah, and if only it was so simple, I would be delighted. I would take it to them. The issue, we have no issue with putting out what the costs are. In fact, we are on record. Ours, we went out to competitive tender, and there were £2,250 per inspection. That's what the costs are. We've no problem with publishing that. We have already got an indication of what the costs are in our documents, in our public consultation documents. We have no problem administratively putting that type of information out. The problem with this is just if we write it in the bill that we are going to regulate costs, well then that's a whole body of work outside reservoir safety that I'm not sure we can justify doing, because I'm not sure that we've seen evidence that this is real and will actually happen.
Through the chair, we have regulated other things in there legally within the bill, and I can't see that being a problem, because there has to be a safeguard in there for the reservoir owner somewhere, and if we don't, it's open season for the engineers.
But I think you would have to be able to demonstrate that it is potentially a problem that needs solved. And I know I accept that it is a concern, but there are other ways of getting costs that you don't know. So, for instance, if you were trying to go and build a house, a normal person that isn't involved with the building trade does not know what a house costs to build. But what they do in that case is they go and get 3 quotes. And they look at it and say, right, well, this one's offering this and it costs X, and this one's offering something different and they're costing this, and this one is the outlier. So there are other ways of getting costs. It doesn't necessarily need to be, and certainly I wouldn't see it as a relationship where you just go and get one cost and therefore you pay that. But there's a long list of reservoir engineers out there, and keep pricing until you get a service and a cost that you're content with, or maybe you'll convince yourself by asking enough of them that this is what it costs and this is what you're going to have to pay.
Okay, so very, very quickly, how many engineers within the 6 counties here can I go to for a price?
Well, there are currently 2 firms that have supervising engineers who live in Northern Ireland. Yeah.
2.
But there are many firms which will supply this service to here, and whilst I do hear that there's an additional cost, sometimes I have to smile to myself whenever I'm travelling over. I fly over to London on a very regular basis. Last time I was over, I had to get on a train from London to Birmingham, and it was costing me more to go on the train than it had cost me to fly over. So whilst I accept there's a cost, I'm not sure it's a disproportionate cost whenever we compare people in England that have reservoir managers maybe closer at hand. it's not that dear to fly in here for an inspection once every 10 years. I don't see it as a disproportionate cost or a cost that would actually stop at least the tendering process.
Okay, any other comments?
No, maybe it.
You finished, Oliver?
Yes, sorry, Chair, thank
no,
you.
No, very good. No, you outlined my concerns and sentiments exactly, Oliver. There's no problem that way. There are. When can the committee expect to see the outstanding amendments?
Yeah, well,
there are a number still, and then because we are at the point where we just can't.
We recognise that entirely.
Yeah.
Whilst it looks like there's a long list, actually a lot of these are interrelated.
Yes.
So whenever, and as I say, we have them drafted. So whenever we get the release on one issue, it actually releases 2 or 3 of these.
Yeah, well, yeah, I can outline where we are with each one. The appeals to the Water Appeals Commission, and that was suggested by the Examiner's Statutory Rules, and that really what that is intended to do is to give OFM, DFM the regulatory power to allow the Water Appeals Commission to charge fees and to award costs. The bill currently drafted gives the department those powers, and the Examiner Statutory Rules identified a conflict of interest there. So we've raised that with OFM, DFM, and we're awaiting a response.
Okay, sorry, members, page 177, sorry, 177 in your packs. Sorry, go on ahead, Kieran. Sorry.
So we were talking to them just before we came here, and Water Appeals Commission are considering the proposal, and we're hoping to meet with them tomorrow or the day following, and we would hope to have something with you. But I would love to be able to say, yes, you will have this on Thursday. We will be trying our utmost to get this and the others with you so that the clerk can issue the papers to you on Thursday.
Yes.
And it's worth clearing, we have them drafted. Everything is sitting ready.
Yeah.
All we need is the agreement that people are comfortable with, with what is written, and that will release them. So we have them.
The other clause that relates to the Water Appeals Commission, or the amendments, are about cost recovery, and those were an amendment that the committee were very concerned to see that we made, and that was to introduce a discretion for the department on advice. We were doing that, and we've made the amendment. The advice was that once the department makes a decision around that, whether it's going to or not going to seek recovery, it introduces under the Convention of Human Rights, it introduces the right of appeal to that. So that's what's keeping us, because we have now asked the Water Appeals Commission to also would they agree to considering appeals under those clauses, and there's about 4 or 5 clauses there. And again, we're waiting on a response to, so we're with the Water Appeals Commission on two of those issues, and we're hoping to have those resolved. There's another clause around defences, where it allows a reservoir manager, if he was given a direction by an inspecting engineer to do something on his reservoir, and he felt that was in breach of some European law, that he didn't follow the direction, and the defence would be, well, the reason why I didn't follow it was because I was fearful of and we're going to. Our first position on that was that we wouldn't enforce in those circumstances, but we're making it absolutely clear in the bill that we wouldn't enforce in those circumstances, and we're just dotting our I's and crossing our T's on that one. Yeah. So we're very hopeful that we will be able to come back to you on that one very quickly. So as I say, we have all of the amendments drafted. It just means getting all the dominoes in a row and getting it signed off.
Okay. We are waiting also on letters from the Minister.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which we will need to have too, because whilst there may be arguments that you put to say we can't have things on bills or faces of bills, we really need as much information as possible, and that would be letters of clarification from the Minister. and then that would be judged on its own merits then, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then, can I just say that on that, the one that Oliver and I have spoke on, the 106, it is a fundamental, it is one of those.
Okay.
And I don't know how we can meet, but...
Yeah, well, on that one, we have no argument against it in principle. In fact, we've said, that our difficulty is in doing it on the face of the bill.
Yes.
And so we are dealing with the legal people. If we can find a way, we will do it.
And even whilst you talked about the will of the department or the Rivers Agency to pass things on to a scrutiny body or to pass things on, that would all, if we could have some sort of clarification or even some guarantee from the Minister, that would be the will of the department.
Right.
All of that there as much as possible in order for us to make judgments on it, the more the better.
Okay.
Okay, clause 17 and 106 has been dealt with. 17's been dealt with. And they just check for me one. Yeah, risk designation. Yep. Okay, again, any other member want to say anything now? Because next week, if all going well and we have the amendments in front of us, we will be going to formal clause by clause. So if any other member has any other comments they would wish to make, this is the time to do it. Okay, well members, we now have a fair idea of how far the Department and Minister is prepared to go regarding amendments, and again we've some more to see, even if we haven't seen all of them yet. So can I ask members to start thinking about any additional amendments they may want, and if they wish these to be committee amendments or whatever, we will definitely want this for next week. So again, this is basically the point where we now move into formal proceedings with clause by clause, and any members who wishes to bring any amendment whatsoever to the committee for the committee then to decide upon. This is the time to do it for next week. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Up to date, very informative as always. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, members, that's us basically through that section. We move on then to agenda item number 11, which is correspondence. Can I refer members to the correspondence on page 183 to 245? Are members content to action correspondence? No, we're four. We're not four.
We can't make decisions on four.
You'll be here in a second.
Who was it when I?
You just went to the phone, made the phone.
We can raise the issue and discuss the issue, but not like that.
Yeah.
You'll be in a second.
Okay, it was just correspondence number 1, just with regard to the conference for Horizon 2020 and whether we considered sending a researcher to that.
Okay.
Okay, hang on. What's my thing's gone off?
27th of May.
It was the 27th of May.
What's passed?
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it would have been a really good idea if we had a thought about it.
I should have thought of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, clearly we didn't.
It's because this wasn't in the pack. Wasn't the pack last week.
Okay, well then would it be possible for us to request maybe notes from that meeting?
Yeah.
From that conference?
Okay, are members then content to action as suggested then on page 182? Members content? Okay. Then agenda item number 12 is forward work programme. Can I refer members to the forward work programme at pages 247? Can I seek agreement for the forward work programme?
Agreed.
Again, you'll see next week then is the 27th, and then the 3rd, so we have two sessions of formal clause by clause reservoirs bill.
Next week's the 3rd. We'd
Oh, sorry, this week.
We
this week.
had hoped to get some done today, but it was just no way.
So we'll basically slot it in one session for the formal clause by clause reservoir bill. We'll see how we go. If we need more, that's when we might need an additional meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, agenda item number 13, any other business? Is there any other business members want to raise? Okay, Agenda 14, date and time of next meeting, which will take place on Tuesday, 3rd of June, 2014 at 1:30 p.m. in room 30, Parliament Buildings. Declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, members.
Assembly, Committee Room 30.